The story begins with Mr. Seymour Hayworth Somerset receiving a sudden order that he must raise a young girl. Confusion washed over him as he studied his papers, questioning what he had just heard to confirm its validity. Silence filled the spacious room before Seymour expressed his lack of understanding regarding the intent behind this request. It turned out the source of the order was his mother-in-law, the Dowager Duchess Freya Hayworth, who sat before him with dignity and prestige, leaning on her cane. With a tone not devoid of sharpness, Duchess Freya questioned whether what she asked was truly that difficult to comprehend. The Duchess then repeated her request more clearly, emphasizing that she would say it again specifically for him. He must take in the small girl sitting quietly and silently beside her. She added that he must grant her the Somerset family name. Meanwhile, the child looked on with innocence, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Seymour regained his composure to ask his mother-in-law about the reason for this sudden and strange decision. In his view, this combination of a sharp-tongued old lady and a small child no larger than a walnut was a bizarre and astonishing mix. He thought to himself that were it not for the great place his mother-in-law held in his heart, considering her a mother to him, his response would have been entirely different. He continued thinking with veiled sarcasm, wondering if she felt the Somerset house was so desolate that, if so, bringing in a cat would have been a better option than a child. The Duchess was infuriated by his implicit response and accused him of being rude, considering his tone a sign that he was not taking her words seriously. Seymour was quick to deny this, explaining that the world is a dangerous place where a stranger cannot be embraced so easily. But the Duchess was unconvinced and replied mockingly, asking if he was in a hurry for her death and funeral rites. Afterward, Duchess Freya sharply changed the subject, asking him if he still frequented Rose's grave despite his many preoccupations. Signs of deep pain appeared on Seymour's face as he placed his hand over his eyes, questioning why the subject of his late wife was being raised. His mother-in-law reacted angrily, denouncing his attempt to stop her from even speaking about her own daughter. At that moment, Seymour recalled his painful memories, realizing that a full year had already passed since that tragic accident. His mother-in-law had just asked him how long he would continue to live in this miserable way, expressing her surprise that it had only been a year. While he felt as though every passing day was hell and that a long age had gone by, Seymour admitted to himself that she was right. A full year had passed since his wife, Rose, died in a tragic carriage accident. Despite the passage of time, the scene of the accident remained vivid in his memory, as if it had happened yesterday, and he could not understand how he could ever forget the day he lost everyone he considered family in a single moment. In that carriage were his only brother-in-law, Graham, and Graham's wife, along with the woman Seymour loved more than his own life. After that tragedy, nothing remained for him but the heavy burden of the title Duke of Somerset, a title his brother-in-law was meant to inherit. Nothing remained but that, and the only child his brother-in-law had left behind. Seymour believed that the title of Duke would be a very heavy burden for his nephew, who was not yet 12 years old. For this reason, he was forced to become the Duke of Somerset instead of his brother-in-law or his nephew, and his suffering was evident in the cigarette butts extinguished in the ashtray before him. Returning to the current conversation, his mother-in-law confronted him with the facts of his destructive lifestyle, saying she knew he only slept in his bed a few nights each month. She continued to scold him, describing him as someone living on alcohol and cigarettes, like a man waiting for death while drowning himself in accumulated work. Seymour pleaded with her not to speak this way in front of the child, justifying his actions as the way he chose to live, a short life. And he believed his mother-in-law understood this well. Then his mother-in-law began to explain what he was thinking, that he was now considering his duty, which was to preserve the name and status of the Somerset family until he could return the title to his nephew, untainted by any flaw. She revealed his fears that if he showed any weakness or stumbled, their relatives would circle the dukedom like hungry hawks in an attempt to seize it. Seymour could not contain himself. He burst out in anger and shouted, asking if she realized how many times he had heard this before, while confirming at the same time that everything she said was true. He added with a voice full of pain that the moment he tried to transfer the title to his nephew, Dante Graham, everyone would attack him and question the boy's legitimacy because of his lineage, for in the end, he was not his son. Seymour continued his sharp discourse, explaining that he had entered the Hayworth family as their daughter's husband, and even now he still bore their name. Despite this, he had assumed the title of Duke of Somerset, which belonged to the Graham lineage. This meant that his nephew, Dante, the rightful heir, had now become a stranger with nothing. Therefore, if he wanted to pass the dukedom to him without interference from the rest of the Graham relatives, he had to take decisive measures. His mother-in-law interrupted him with a sharp strike of her cane on the floor, asserting that she fully understood his intentions and fears. and that what he dreaded would indeed cause a major catastrophe if it happened. She then proposed a solution to the lineage problem that troubled him, which made Seymour look at her in confusion and astonishment, wondering what she meant. Seymour thought she was suggesting adopting Dante into the Hayworth family, so he immediately rejected the idea, explaining that he could not do so because Dante was the direct and sole heir to the Graham lineage. However, the Duchess denounced his misunderstanding and asked who said she was talking about adopting him. Instead, she revealed her true plan, that he should arrange a marriage for him and that he would take responsibility for raising this little girl to be the future bride. She explained to him that when the girl grew up, he would marry her to his nephew, and then grant them the title, thus solving the problem. The Duchess then approached the child, who smiled happily, and asked Seymour for his opinion on this solution, which she considered perfect. Seymour could not believe what he was hearing. He told her that what she was suggesting was ridiculous and defied logic, and he could not find the right words to express his surprise. He then placed his hand on his face in despair, asking if she was truly asking him to raise a child just to achieve this purpose. At that point, he asked his first question about the identity of this child, inquiring where she had brought her from in the first place. The child answered him herself in a clear and cheerful voice, saying she was from the Townsend orphanage and that she was 10 years old. Then she introduced herself with a broad, joyful smile, announcing that her name was Louina Whitfield. Louina continued, explaining that she was the one who told Lady Hayworth of her desire to become a member of the Somerset family. Seymour was even more shocked and shouted at his mother-in-law in protest, asking if she had brought her to him simply because she expressed that desire. The Duchess responded calmly, asking what was stopping them, so Seymour exploded in anger, asserting there were many reasons against it, and that it was clear this child was only after the family's wealth. But Louina interrupted him enthusiastically as she stood up, strongly denying that she needed any wealth. She asserted that she was not interested in the Hayworth name, nor Graham, nor even the Somerset title. To prove the sincerity of her intentions, she offered to sign a contract waiving any future rights to the family or the title, which astonished Seymour. Seymour then asked her why she wanted to be part of the family, and she answered with touching simplicity that all she wanted was to have a family. She reminded him that she was an orphan, and as he knew, she had no family. Then she began making her promises to him, saying that if he accepted her, she would be waiting for him at the door whenever he returned home. She added enthusiastically that they would eat breakfast together. She could even draw a heart with sauce on his fried eggs because she was good at that, which made him mutter the word heart in confusion. She continued her speech as she approached him to sit beside him. She confessed to him that she was gathering all her courage to say all these things to him. Then she moved closer to whisper her final promise, that she would give him a goodnight kiss every night, and she asked him what he thought of all that. Then she called him by his title, Duke, and told him they could truly be a good family. This child was Louina Whitfield, just an ordinary orphan girl from the Townsend home, and she had just turned 10. Her name was so common that it was one of the most used names in the orphanage she came from. Aside from being slightly luckier than the other children, there was nothing special or remarkable about her. The events show Louina wandering in a green field, filled with happiness after finding a rare four-leaf clover. Her peers from the orphanage gathered around her, their faces showing signs of surprise and admiration, expressing their fascination at her ability to find another one. Louina held the plant in her hands, thinking to herself that she was truly lucky and that this was the 7th plant she had found. But behind this apparent happiness, she was hiding a great secret. She was not just an ordinary girl, but had been reincarnated as a character from a book she had read in her previous life. The events flash back to a few days ago, specifically on Thanksgiving Day, when the Townsend Orphanage was holding its annual collective birthday celebration for children who did not know their real birth dates, so they could share the joy of blowing out the cake candles. Perhaps because she blew the candles with extra force that day, she felt a sudden dizziness that made her lose her balance, suddenly falling unconscious in the middle of the party. Chaos prevailed, and the voices of terrified children rose as they shouted for the teacher, announcing that Louina had fallen. While she was unconscious, she thought with bitter irony about her bad luck and how she fell on her birthday specifically, retracting her previous words about being lucky. After 3 days and nights of suffering, she finally woke up to find a doctor beside her telling those around her that if his diagnosis was correct, there was no hope for this child's recovery. The doctor confirmed that the best she could hope for was to live for the next 5 years, as there was no cure for her condition, informing her that she was terminally ill. Louina did not process what she heard, and wondered to herself if this doctor had lost his mind, for he described her as pitiable. She thought that she was still 10 years old, and if she only lived for 5 more years, she would die at 15. She felt a great sense of injustice, as she was the one who always gave the grandfather at the orphanage one of the clovers if she found 2. Her sense of injustice extended to the teachers who accepted the matter so easily, even though she was always kind to everyone and shared her food. It was extremely cruel. Even in the dreams she had during the 3 days she was unconscious, memories of her previous life returned to her, where she was just an ordinary student who loved cute things and delicious food. She was always looking for interesting novels to read, until that ordinary life ended suddenly when a truck hit her and she died at a young age. Those memories and that feeling were still vivid in her mind, to the point that she even remembered the novel she was reading at that moment, which was titled Until the Lily Withers. The novel revolved around a heroine with a terminal illness, just like her, and here she remembered the name of the disease in the novel, the Lily disease. Suddenly, she realized the terrifying truth. The doctor had told her that she too suffered from the Lily disease. The doctor explained that after the fever recedes, no clear symptoms may appear, but white spots spread across the body, causing it to rot until death. He confirmed it was an incurable terminal illness, and on that day, shortly after turning 10, she received her final diagnosis. Then she realized that what she saw was not just a dream, and that she had indeed been reincarnated into the world of the novel she had read. Worse yet, she was just an unnamed extra character. Despair took hold of her, wondering why she had to be an extra character, and on top of all that, an orphan with a terminal illness. But amidst all this misery, there was one glimmer of hope. She knew the cure for this disease because the Lily disease only exists in the novel Until the Lily Withers that she read in her previous life. The novel was a traditional reverse harem story where the heroine, ill and beautiful as a lily, suffers among heroes obsessed with her. The protagonist of the novel, suffering from the same disease, set out on a journey to find the cure, and fate led her to meet Seymour, one of the candidate male leads, and her ordeal began. The reason for her suffering was that Seymour was a hidden villain obsessed with her because of her resemblance to his late wife. Although he eventually brought the cure to the woman he loved, the problem was that the cure only appears at the beginning of the novel's events, meaning it would not exist in the world for another 7 years. And by that time, she would have been dead for a long while. At this point, Luina decided that this situation would not continue, and that she refused to die a miserable, meaningless death as happened in her previous life. While Luina stood before her mirror, she was deep in thought, wondering how to meet Seymour. For he was not just a nobleman, but a duke and the hidden villain of the original story, while she was just an orphan from a remote orphanage. She kept wondering in despair if there was some way to achieve this while the church bells rang outside. Suddenly, one of the orphanage girls entered, calling her enthusiastically, and asked if she was ready, which confused Luina, who did not know what she was talking about. The girl laughed and said she seemed absent-minded because of her illness, then reminded her that today was the day they were going to volunteer at the mansion of one of the patrons. And here Luina remembered that this had been mentioned in the meeting. The girl urged her to hurry and get ready, warning her to be extremely careful because they would meet Lady Hayworth today. Luina stopped suddenly upon hearing the name Hayworth, as it seemed very familiar to her. When she searched her memory from the novel, she suddenly realized that Lady Hayworth was Seymour's mother-in-law, and she was the only person capable of dealing with his arrogance. In fact, she was like a real mother to him. Here, Luina wondered enthusiastically how she had missed this easy path to reach Seymour. Lady Hayworth, the widow of the late Marquis, was the one with absolute authority in the Hayworth household. But she was also, since losing her only daughter, Rose Hayworth, an eccentric figure who inspired awe in the hearts of the orphanage children due to her gloomy aura. She would harshly criticize any small detail she saw, such as a child wiping their nose or another whose buttons did not match. Luina remembered other details from the novel. Lady Hayworth was extremely keen on perfection, and her son-in-law was Seymour Graham himself, the second son of the Duke of Somerset, whom the Hayworth family had adopted as their daughter's husband since he was young, becoming Seymour Hayworth. Then one day, after the sudden death of the Duke of Somerset, Seymour inherited the title, becoming the Duke of Somerset and the Hayworth's son-in-law at the same time, thus effectively becoming the master of both families. Although his marriage was political, he loved Rose more than anyone else. And Lady Hayworth was not just his mother-in-law, but his mother and the only person who shared his pain of loss. Luina's face lit up with hope. Lady Hayworth was the patron of the Townsend orphanage, which meant that if things went well, she might be able to meet Seymour. But she quickly came to her senses, realizing that merely meeting Lady Hayworth did not guarantee she would meet Seymour. However, she returned to thinking positively. She had always been lucky in finding four-leaf clovers, and possessing the memories of her previous life was itself a stroke of luck. She gathered her courage and decided to move forward with this mission to save her life. But after a few hours, she found herself in a difficult position, wondering in despair what she should do. She felt as though she wouldn't even get a chance to start. She had believed things would go smoothly, but what happened was that one of the children suddenly sneezed near Lady Hayworth, which aroused her displeasure. Luina felt doomed, and that her plan had failed even before she began to speak. A stern and frightening expression appeared on Lady Hayworth's face, while the child who sneezed trembled with fear. Luina wondered in terror what she should do now. Unluckily, the day she chose was the day Lady Hayworth was holding a special event, a tea party for noble ladies. She was planning to use this opportunity to at least start a conversation with her. But Martin's sneeze ruined everything completely, and she wondered if this was the end without achieving anything. Meanwhile, one of the teachers was harshly scolding Martin for sitting silently and demanding he apologize immediately to the lady for his rudeness. The child stammered as he apologized, but the teacher ordered him not to stammer and to speak clearly, which made him burst into tears. Lady Hayworth suddenly intervened, saying that was enough and that seeing the child cry like that annoyed her. Then she asked her servant, Henry, to take the child and calm him down. The attendees marveled at the generosity of Lady Hayworth, who was usually very strict regarding etiquette, and they decided not to bring children suffering from pollen allergies again, while Luina wondered in confusion what was happening. Luina began to think about the reason for Lady Hayworth's unusual leniency, and realized that perhaps if she used the situation well, she might be able to get her alone. At that moment, one of the noble ladies suggested they walk in the beautiful spring garden of the mansion, accompanied by the children. Another lady welcomed the idea and pointed out that their number was perfectly suited for walking in pairs, which made Luina think this was her chance. Luina took advantage of the situation and stepped forward toward Lady Hayworth boldly, introduced herself as Luina Whitfield, and then asked her to allow her to learn elegance and sophistication from her. Lady Hayworth noticed that this was the child who had been casting fleeting glances at her the whole time, and she thought to herself that it had been a long time since she had seen a child who did not fear her. Although she had not planned to walk, she agreed to Luina's request, saying she saw no reason to refuse as long as it was she who desired it. She invited her to walk with her in the designated walking path, but Luina surprised her with a categorical refusal, announcing she was not interested in walking at all, which aroused the surprise and shock of those present. One of the teachers rushed to apologize, thinking the child had misunderstood something, while scolding Luina for what she had uttered. But Luina ignored them and continued her speech, addressing Lady Hayworth, expressing her admiration for her elegant accent, and offering to read her a book while learning that accent from her. This bold request impressed Lady Hayworth, who thought about how this child, instead of fearing her, was demanding what she wanted boldly. Lady Hayworth agreed to her request and ordered her servant Henry to prepare a place for them inside the mansion for reading, which made Luina very happy because she succeeded in getting the Dowager Marchioness alone. She felt that the matter might be easier than she expected, and as soon as they were alone, Lady Hayworth took the initiative to ask her name again. Then Lady Hayworth confronted her directly, asking her about the reason for this trick, which confused Luina. Lady Hayworth told her she knew very well she hadn't invited her inside just to read a book, and she asked her not to play games with her. Here, Luina realized her plan was clear. But before Lady Hayworth could respond, Luina forestalled her with a sudden question, pointing out that she too, like the child Martin, suffered from pollen allergies. Confusion appeared on Lady Hayworth's face, so Luina continued, explaining that the flower garden was not a comfortable place for her. She revealed to her that she noticed her slight sneeze when Martin sneezed, and that this was the reason for her leniency with him, because he suffered from the same allergy. And she thought to herself that she knew that the noses and throats of adults weaken as they age, because the old doctor at the orphanage always told her so. Lady Hayworth asked her if she had noticed that from the beginning and was watching her for that reason, so Luina denied it and asked if she could tell her the truth. Lady Hayworth agreed to listen to her. Then Luina told her she had a request, and that this was the reason for her desire to be alone with her. Lady Hayworth coldly wondered about the request she wanted from her, which made Luina smile nervously and confirm her request. But Lady Hayworth flatly refused her request, expressing her surprise that a small thing like her would drag her inside to ask for a favor. And she warned her that if she thought she would be lenient with her because she was a child, she was completely mistaken. Luina was shocked by this direct refusal. While Lady Hayworth grabbed the bell to summon her servant, she ordered him to call the teacher and take this child out immediately, which made Luina panic. She was about to be expelled without even mentioning the first letter of Seymour's name. When the servant arrived, Luina gathered her courage, realizing she had worked hard for this opportunity and had to say something. Luina struck her hands on the table and shouted, calling Lady Hayworth by her full title. Then she revealed her true request, that she wanted her to allow her to kiss her on the cheek before she left in front of the carriage. She added that she knew she was no small opponent, but if that were the case, she would resort to another plan, explaining that every time she walked in the village streets, She felt very jealous seeing children kiss adults on the cheeks. Luina continued her touching speech, explaining that as an orphan, she had no adult to kiss her, and she was curious to know that feeling. That's why she wanted to ask her for it if she had the chance, announcing that she would use every possible trick to achieve her goal. Signs of being moved appeared on Lady Hayworth's face, who wondered to herself if this child had gone through all this trouble for such a simple request, as most of her visitors were seeking business investments or had hidden motives. They thought she was an easy target after losing her husband and daughter. Yet this child asked for nothing but a kiss on the cheek. This strange behavior reminded her of her late daughter Rose when she was young. Without realizing it, Lady Hayworth found herself thinking of Rose. Then she regained her composure and told Luina she understood her feelings, and since her request was not difficult, she would fulfill it for her. Upon Luina's departure, the teacher waited for her at the carriage, so Luina kissed Lady Hayworth on the cheek, and Luina promised her she would come to visit her again, which the lady welcomed. This scene caused shock and surprise to all who were present, teachers and children. They never imagined a child would kiss the Dowager Marchioness on the cheek. While the carriage moved away, Luina kept waving to Lady Hayworth. After Luina left, Lady Hayworth called her servant Henry. She ordered him to ask the chef to search for dessert recipes that children might like, while Luina, on the way back, was explaining to her friend what happened with a broad smile. The next morning at the orphanage, Martin, the child who sneezed at the party, surprised Luina by giving her a gift. The gift was a tangerine fruit, and he presented it to her, thanking her for what she did at the tea party. For thanks to her, things went smoothly and no one got angry. One of the girls commented that Luina was amazing that day, even kissing the lady on the cheek, which surprised the director. But Luina downplayed the matter and felt a little guilty because she did it for her plan. Suddenly, one of the girls appeared, wondering angrily about the reason for all this fuss over a mere kiss, while she was scolding the others and ordering them to clean. In the kitchen, another girl was grumbling that Luina got an extra egg at breakfast, which she considered special treatment. But the other girl replied that they might be trying to get close to her in anticipation of her joining the Hayworth family. The first girl dismissed the idea, saying that someone like Luina, the most ordinary child in the orphanage, could not join the Hayworth family, while Luina was enjoying the tangerine, unconcerned by their talk. The girl kept repeating that old people are like that, and that the lady would have been just as happy if she were the one who kissed her. Luina realized that her reputation had risen since that day, and that everyone's attention in the orphanage had turned to her, which made her a thorn in the side of jealous people. Luina faced the jealous girl, and Luina suggested she try kissing the lady herself next time. This suggestion angered the girl and made her stammer. A teacher who was looking for Luina interrupted them and told her to get ready to leave. When Luina asked her where to, the teacher told her that Lady Hayworth had sent a carriage for her, which surprised Luina and the other girl. Luina wondered in shock if this meant her charm had worked with Lady Hayworth. She felt extremely happy, deciding that it was time to activate charm tactics in full force. That evening, Luina was waiting in the drawing room of Hayworth Mansion, thinking it was a smart move on her part to prepare the magic trio set in case of any emergency. But her wait was long, and she began to feel anxious, noticing that the servants were entering and leaving busily since her arrival. Suddenly, the servant Henry entered and told her with regret that she would have to leave today. Luina refused to leave before meeting Lady Hayworth, saying she had something to say and that she could not leave without showing her her magic trio set. Meanwhile, she heard the servant talking with one of the maids, saying the matter was serious and that Lady Hayworth's condition had worsened since morning. She heard him asking about the doctor who was traveling, so the maid told him she had just received a message that he had just left, which made Luina wonder in shock what was happening. Anxiety took hold of Luina as she hid and watched the servants, wondering if something serious had happened to Lady Hayworth. And at the same time, she feared she would miss this opportunity and didn't know when she would get another chance to meet her. That's why she decided not to give up and to follow them to see what was happening. She heard one of the maids saying that the lady woke up briefly but went back to sleep immediately, complaining that the nausea hadn't gone, and that she was sweating profusely and had never collapsed like this before, and they didn't know what to do. Another maid wondered anxiously what would become of the Hayworth family if something happened to her. But the servant Henry scolded her, asking her not to say such nonsense, and ordered her to bring warm water to wipe her sweat. When Luina learned that Lady Hayworth was not well, she decided to go to her room. She slipped inside before anyone returned, remembering that in the events of the original novel, Lady Hayworth had already died. She only appeared in Seymour's memories when he would say, "If Lady Hayworth were alive in such times." But the events of the original novel start 7 years later, so she thought she was safe for now. However, this incident made her wonder if this illness was the cause of her death. She noticed her symptoms: sleepiness, cold sweat, and the absence of any obvious external injuries. Suddenly, she realized these symptoms were familiar to her, At that moment, the servant Henry entered and saw her, asking her in surprise how she got in here, then asked her to leave because the lady needed rest. But Luina ignored him and asked him loudly to bring sugar water immediately. She insisted on her request, emphasizing the need to bring it at once. After a while, Lady Hayworth woke up to find herself in her room, and she saw Luina beside her and asked her how she entered her room. So Luina told her she had woken up. She followed up by explaining that she fainted because of low blood sugar, so she made sugar water for her. Lady Hayworth asked her if she had waited until she woke up, so Luina answered in the affirmative, admitting that the butler asked her to leave, but she was very worried, so she stayed on her own, and she offered her apology. She explained to her that when she saw her symptoms, she found them similar to what the old orphanage doctor taught her about low blood sugar, so she couldn't stand idly by. She added that she thought the emergency treatment she learned might help the lady, and she apologized again for staying without permission. Luina also told her the doctor said this condition is not serious if managed continuously, which made Lady Hayworth smile, thinking that this girl had helped her again today. And she found her bed covered with flowers made of fabric. When she asked about them, Luina told her the servant brought her a set of fabrics and she made these flowers while waiting for her to wake up. The lady looked at the flowers and remembered she used to make many of them with her daughter Rose when she was young, and she didn't think she would see them again. Lady Hayworth smiled and thanked Luina, saying that thanks to her, the emergency had ended. Luina laughed modestly, while the lady thought she was a rare child with a kind heart and good manners. Lady Hayworth decided to reward Luina for her kindness and told her that although Seymour is the official head of the Hayworth family, she is the one who manages the family's internal affairs. This means all Hayworth properties are hers. Then she offered her a reward proportional to the risk she took to save her life and asked her if she had thought about the matter. Then she made her a sudden offer and asked her if she wanted to join the Hayworth family, which completely shocked Luina. Lady Hayworth assured her she would not bring shame to the Hayworth name and asked her if she accepted her offer. She added that if she accepted, she would get delicious meals every day and would wear many beautiful clothes, which excited Luina, who wondered if this meant she would eat delicious cake every day and wouldn't have to share her clothes with other children anymore. Luina thought that Lady Hayworth's offer to join her family was an incredible offer, especially remembering their first meeting. However, despite her deep gratitude, she told her the matter would be a little difficult because this was not what she originally wanted. Lady Hayworth was surprised by her response and asked her what she meant by saying it was difficult. Then, Luina revealed her true goal, that she wanted to become a child under the guardianship of the Duke of Somerset, not Lady Hayworth. Lady Hayworth told her that joining the Hayworth family would be better for her, but Luina replied that she heard from the maids that Duke Seymour is going through a difficult time after losing his family. She added she knew Lady Hayworth was also deeply worried about him. She went on to explain that the Duke, in addition to being the head of the Somerset family, takes care of the Hayworth family's affairs, making those around him try to take the title of the dukedom from him. In the worst case, he may not even be able to pass the title to his nephew, which will cause him a great sense of guilt. And seeing her sadness while watching him pains Luina's heart. Luina continued presenting her plan, saying she thought carefully about what she could do to ease their fears. And since the nephew who would inherit the title bears a different family name, she thought that if she became a ward and married the nephew, that would create a justification and legitimacy for the transfer of the title. She admitted she didn't really know what kind of person the nephew was, but that didn't matter much to her. For either way, if she married him, she would become a member of their family. Most importantly, this meant that the nights Lady Hayworth spent worrying about the Duke would disappear, and she would be satisfied just by easing their concerns in this way. Lady Hayworth was deeply moved and grabbed Luina's hand, saying she was more thoughtful and deep than she imagined. She told her she understood her intentions well and believed she could handle the rumors that would spread because of her background. But she set a condition. If she wanted to become a ward of Seymour on the condition of marrying her grandson, there was something she had to do first. Here, events return to the present, where Luina stands before Seymour, smiling and telling him they can become a truly good family. Extreme confusion appeared on Seymour, and he told her he didn't really understand what she was talking about and that he didn't know how she managed to gain his mother-in-law's favor. But he warned her that if she aimed for the position of heir, that was completely rejected. So Luina hurried to deny it. To prove her words, she showed him an agreement she signed with the lady, pledging never to covet the position of heir. Seymour was surprised by the existence of an agreement, so his mother-in-law interrupted him, telling him to raise her first, and then they would talk, and she expressed her dissatisfaction with his lack of flexibility despite his young age. Seymour shouted, wondering how he was supposed to raise a child. So his mother-in-law replied that it wasn't as if she was asking him to care for an infant, and that the matter wouldn't be difficult, and she wasn't asking him to personally care for her, as she knew well that children her age grow well with a private tutor. Seymour wondered dismissively if she was saying this seriously, considering the matter completely ridiculous. Then Luina intervened and offered her apology to the Duke, explaining that she acted stubbornly and insisted on becoming a ward of Seymour's family, and the lady kindly accepted despite that. She revealed to him that Lady Hayworth originally offered her to join her family, but as an orphan who never received love, she understands others' feelings very well. She told him she realizes the lady always thinks of him first, worries about him, and cares for him more than anyone else. For this reason, she wanted to ease Lady Hayworth's concerns even a little. She continued that she didn't want to be just a family in name, but a real family where they share their hearts. She assured him she wouldn't harbor any ambitions, and that all she wanted was to be someone he checked on occasionally and worried about a little. That was enough for her. Then she asked him sadly if this was impossible. At that moment, Seymour was wondering in surprise how a child barely 10 years old understood their situation so clearly, and that she must know that joining his mother-in-law's family was the easier path. Yet she insisted on becoming a ward and wrote an agreement, all because she wanted to become a real family to ease their burdens. After deep thought, Seymour grabbed the agreement and decided to read it carefully. Luina called him by his title, Duke, so he answered yes, and she told him enthusiastically that he could read it as much as he liked. Seymour noticed she was excessively calm, a calmness that exceeded what could be expected from a child her age. Yes, just like that other child, his nephew. That night at Seymour's house, Luina was in her new bed thinking happily that things went better than she expected. She hadn't even hoped they would allow her to stay at the Duke's residence while reviewing the documents. All this thanks to Lady Hayworth standing by her side strongly, and now all she had to do was slowly get close to Seymour and get the medicine. She felt extremely happy as she jumped in her bed, realizing she had survived now. But suddenly, she got up from her bed, having remembered something she almost forgot. She was surprised by the presence of the maid Irie, still awake, who asked her if she was having trouble sleeping. So Luina, in turn, asked her if she knew the location of the Duke's room. Irie was surprised by her question at this late hour. So Luina told her with a smile that she made a promise to the Duke. Meanwhile, a servant was reading a report to Seymour, telling him that today was Lady Luina's first day and asking him if he should go check her sleeping arrangements. Seymour coldly replied that there was no need for that. She could simply sleep. His assistant, Axel Portman, intervened and told him that despite his words, he gave her the brightest room in the mansion, wondering if he cared about the little lady. Axel continued his speech, pointing out that she liked him more than expected, and that at this rate, he might make her his adopted daughter. Seymour stood up suddenly. So Axel asked him where he was going at this hour. Seymour replied that his mother-in-law asked him to stay at the mansion on the child's first day, and he was finishing his work in the office out of necessity, and since midnight had passed, he could go work elsewhere. Axel denounced this logic. When Seymour was about to open the door, he heard a voice from outside saying, "Oh, you opened it first." He recognized the voice, and Luina stood before him in her nightgown, announcing she came to give him a goodnight kiss. Seymour wondered in confusion, a goodnight kiss? Luina enthusiastically replied that she promised him that when he takes her in, and she would do it every time. Seymour refused, saying he didn't need it and had work to finish. But Luina strongly objected, asserting he couldn't work at this late hour and that adults need to sleep at night, otherwise their health will deteriorate. She grabbed his hand, telling him she wouldn't have it this way, asked him to go together, and offered to read him a book. She pulled him with her, urging him to hurry. Seymour thought to himself that he had no choice but to humor her for a while before going to work. In the bedroom, Luina was reading him a story aloud, saying, "And finally, the prince found the dragon sleeping deep in the forest." The prince thought to himself that if the dragon woke up, the village would be in danger again. But when he saw it up close, it looked kinder than he thought, which made Seymour think the situation was driving him crazy. Luina continued reading. After a moment of thought, the prince took out his cloak instead of his sword, and here Seymour thought to himself that she said she learned to read aloud at the orphanage, but her voice was unnecessarily clear. She completed, "Then he covered the dragon with the cloak, and at that moment a fairy appeared from behind a tree." The fairy continued her speech to the prince, explaining that the dragon was cursed to sleep forever, and that the only way to wake him was with a touch from a warm-hearted person, and she told him he had awakened the poor dragon. While Seymour was listening to the story, he was thinking to himself, wondering if the dragon really wanted to wake up. Wasn't it better for him to sleep forever? He added that he had often thought this way since the accident occurred, wondering if the dragon resented the prince for waking him. But he noticed that these dark thoughts weren't haunting him today, perhaps because Luina's voice reading to him was strangely bright. Although he thought all this was completely unnecessary, he surrendered to sleep. The next morning, one of the maids entered Seymour's room, thinking he must have overdrank again last night. Since his wife's death, he had become accustomed to relying on alcohol to sleep, and she was hoping to find fewer empty bottles today. But she was surprised by the presence of a storybook beside his bed and wondered in surprise about the reason for the storybook's presence. She was even more shocked when she found the Duke asleep and Louina asleep beside him. Seymour woke up late in the morning to bright sunlight and the sounds of birds, realizing he slept deeply without a headache or hangover effects. His servant entered crying with emotion, expressing his surprise that his master slept without touching a single drop of alcohol, and that this must be thanks to Lady Louina. Seymour asked angrily why no one woke him up, then asked about the location of that troublemaker. The servant told him she was eating her meal and suggested he eat with her, but he completely refused the suggestion. In the dining hall, Louina was enjoying a luxurious breakfast like she had never seen before at the orphanage. The chef told her she was happy the food liked her and asked her to eat a lot. Louina was thinking happily that she fell asleep beside the Duke yesterday without realizing it, and that she was happy he didn't get angry, but she wished they had eaten together. It was sad he had already left for work. Nevertheless, she felt she might have gained some of his favor with this and that she was getting closer to getting her cure. Her enjoyment of the food was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger carrying a letter from the Dowager Countess Hayworth. After she finished her food, the messenger, Hugo, gave her the letter. The letter was addressed to Dear Louina, asking about her first day at Somerset Mansion and asking her to tell her everything if that ill-tempered man had bothered her. Louina replied to herself that he hadn't bothered her, but they slept together peacefully. The lady followed up in her letter that she would visit the mansion in a few days and asked her to eat well and sleep well until she saw her healthy face, which made Louina very happy because she would get praise for making the Duke sleep. But she was surprised by a note at the end of the letter saying, "The child you wanted to meet will come too." Louina wondered in shock if she meant Dante Graham, Seymour's nephew and the heir of Somerset. A few days later, the long-awaited day of Lady Hayworth's visit arrived. When she met her, Louina thought to herself it was strange she only chose her so she could stay alive. Lady Hayworth asked her if she was okay, so Louina answered enthusiastically and wondered to herself why she felt all this emotion and happiness to see her again. And was it just habituation to this life while seeking her cure? Then she began talking to her enthusiastically about the delicious food, the comfortable bed, and the beautiful clothes she wears every day, admitting she talks a lot just because she's happy to see her. Then she added proudly that she managed to make Duke Seymour sleep early after she read him a fairy tale beside him, which aroused Lady Hayworth's surprise, who described what she did as incredible. This was the first time Seymour slept in someone else's presence. Then Lady Hayworth told her that she, as she wrote in her letter, had brought that child with her. Louina realized her intuition was correct. Lady Hayworth called for the boy to approach, while Louina thought to herself that she was finally meeting him today, the boy who might become her future husband. Standing before them was Dante Graham. In an instant, Louina found herself sitting alone with Dante in a room filled with sweets, wondering how they had ended up alone together. Lady Hayworth had told them to stay and get to know each other while she went to check if Seymour had neglected the house affairs again, which made Louina secretly wish the lady would return soon. Louina tried to gather her courage, reminding herself that this was her original goal and that if she failed to marry Dante, she would have to return to the orphanage. She would continue to suffer from the disease until she died, something that simply could not happen. Therefore, she had to get close to him no matter the cost, but his scowl already made her feel anxious. Then she remembered the cake. Everyone loves cake. She called him by name and offered him some, pointing out that the head chef here made wonderful desserts, and she was sure he would like them. But he responded to her coldly, warning her not to think that this was her home because, in the end, he was the one who would be the family heir. Louina was shocked by his unexpected reaction and tried to tell him that he had misunderstood her. But he interrupted her, telling her to forget it and saying he didn't want to hear her words, considering that the adults had forced them into this arrangement anyway. Then he stood up to leave. Shock took hold of Louina, wondering if he thought she had come here to steal the position of heir. She decided she must catch up to him and explain this misunderstanding, but he disappeared quickly. She wondered in confusion if he had already run away from the mansion. She felt lost, as she did not yet know the layout of the palace, and wished she could look from a high place to see everything at once. Here, she remembered that huge tree in the garden and thought that since it was the largest tree in the palace, she might be able to find Dante if she climbed it. She decided to sneak there quickly and return before anyone noticed her absence. She hadn't been the tree-climbing champion at the orphanage for nothing. Once she reached the top, she was amazed by the sheer height and realized that the Duke's property was on an entirely different level compared to the orphanage. But she soon remembered that this was not a time for admiration. If she didn't find Dante, her first impression of him would be ruined forever. She began searching for him everywhere, and soon found him sitting alone in a corner, realizing he couldn't have gone far. She decided to catch up to him and explain that she didn't care about the heir's position, but she stopped when she heard voices. She saw two men walking in the garden, one of whom looked like Duke Seymour. She noticed that Dante had not yet noticed their presence. Then she saw the Duke heading directly toward Dante. Luina thought that in the orphanage, they were scolded if they wandered without permission. If she left them alone, they would inevitably collide, and Dante would be caught red-handed sneaking around when he should have been listening to Lady Hayworth. In that case, she decided she must grab their attention, so she shouted from the top of the tree, calling for Duke Seymour. Dante stopped, surprised by the voice coming from the top of the tree, and wondered about its source. Luina smiled as she waved to the Duke from among the tree branches, welcoming him and expressing surprise at his early return home. Then she offered to help prepare tea or walk in the garden. Seymour asked her in astonishment why she was up in the tree, and she answered cheerfully that she was playing hide-and-seek with Dante. Luina felt relieved because she succeeded in grabbing his attention and avoiding the awkward situation, but the man with Seymour seemed deeply impressed. The man was muttering in amazement, commenting on Luina's perfection, which left Luina confused. The man continued his admiration, saying she wasn't overly aristocratic nor was she rustic. Rather, she was a truly beautiful maiden. Then he announced that she would be his model, which only added to Luina's confusion. A few hours before this meeting, Seymour had been in his office writing a letter and had learned that Lady Hayworth had visited the Duke's residence. He concluded she hadn't come to see him. Otherwise, she would have come to the office, but clearly went to see that child, which his assistant Axel confirmed, adding that they seemed to have hit it off well. Axel continued that the servants couldn't stop praising her, saying she was very friendly and approached people quickly. Seymour thought that she was indeed excessively friendly and remembered how she had come to him a few days ago. She had entered enthusiastically carrying a new book. She told him she would read him this book today, and that she had changed the type of story so he wouldn't feel bored. Confusion appeared on Seymour's face. Since that day, she began coming to his room as soon as he finished work, staying by his side reading fairy tales until he fell asleep. This happened several times until her daily coming became normal. One day, while Seymour was working in his office, Axel told him that the carriage back home had arrived. But Seymour replied that he told them he wouldn't return to the palace today, only for Axel to reply that Lady Luina was the one who personally sent the carriage and insisted he leave work on time. She didn't stop at preventing him from working overtime. Eventually, he found himself leaving work at a set time every day. Even after returning to the palace, he spent his nights listening to the fairy tales she read to him until he slept. On top of all that, she stubbornly insisted on having breakfast with him as well. Every morning, she would bid him goodbye as he went to work and ask him to return early. Seymour looked at her as he left and muttered his agreement. While in his office, he thought that he only accepted her presence because he couldn't ignore his mother-in-law's shouting. But since that child's arrival, his physical condition had improved slightly. Axel interrupted him, noting that the servants' faces were full of smiles these days, and it seemed they welcomed the little lady warmly. He added enthusiastically, pointing to Seymour's clear skin and faster efficiency at work. Axel continued that he hadn't felt as relieved of his master's worries as he did these days, but Seymour ordered him to be silent and leave, while Axel muttered that he was speaking from his heart. At that moment, Derek, the head of the brand planning department, entered looking nervous. Seymour asked him if there was a problem. Derek told him that the child model responsible for the children's clothing line had contacted them and told them he had suffered a scar on his face and would stop all his activities. Derek told Duke Seymour they had to find a new model, which made Seymour take off his glasses tiredly and agree on the necessity of finding a replacement. But Derek explained it wouldn't be easy. The photo shoot was scheduled for the next day, and they remembered well how difficult it was to secure the first model in the first place. Seymour's company was primarily a commercial distribution company. The reason that drove a company like this to establish a clothing brand was to distribute a batch of naturally dyed cotton fabrics they had imported. This coincided with the spread of the simple, rustic life wave among high society. Noble ladies began searching for a natural look instead of shimmering silk and expensive jewelry, so Seymour planned to take advantage of this trend. For this marketing campaign, he hired the commercial artist Auber. He was considered the most famous among the nobility at that time and an indispensable talent in promoting every high-end brand. But the problem was in the moodiness of Auber, who exploded in anger, shouting that this wasn't the feeling he was looking for. He was famous for refusing to work if he didn't like the model. He continued his shouting, explaining that he wanted something healthy and pure, elegant yet humble, a child who looks like a wildflower. not an expensive bouquet of roses. The scene returned to Seymour's office, where his assistants wondered in despair where they were supposed to find a child with these specifications. Axel hesitated for a moment and then told Seymour that there might be a suitable child in the palace now. Indeed, as soon as Auber saw Luina in the garden, he knelt before her in fascination, announcing she was a pure, uncontaminated child. He completed his description of her, saying she looked like a forest fairy. Luina looked at him in confusion, pointing to herself and asking if he meant her. Auber confirmed with great enthusiasm that it was her, and that she possessed the perfect stature he was looking for. Then he stood up and began moving with theatrical gestures, feeling inspired, considering everything perfect, from the temperature and humidity to the general atmosphere and scattered leaves, and announced that if this child were the model, he could draw anything. Luina approached Seymour and asked about the man's identity while thinking to herself that he must be the rising painter, Auber. Seymour placed his hand on Auber's head and addressed Luina, explaining that he believed she might be suitable for the work he was doing and that he had come to ask for her. London. He assured her he wouldn't force her to do something she didn't want and she could refuse if she felt it was beyond her energy. Then he promised her that if she agreed to help him, he would do anything she asked in return. Seymour looked at Luina, thinking that his request was sudden, and it was natural for a child not to be inclined to accept it, wondering how to convince her. But Luina had reached a stunning conclusion. She remembered she had read about this situation in a novel before. This was Seymour's failed business venture mentioned briefly in the novel, which began with his failure to find a child model. From there, Seymour's affairs began to crumble gradually. He lost a huge amount of investment. His company began to falter, and he himself became sharper and harsher. Luina thought about it from the opposite perspective. If she solved this problem, it meant she would get the cure faster. With a bright smile, she immediately agreed enthusiastically. Seymour was surprised by her quick decision and asked if she had truly decided that fast. Luina replied with a smile, saying she was happy to help him, and if there was something she could do, she should help as much as she could. Seymour thanked her for her agreement, but insisted she tell him anything she wanted in return, explaining he would feel more comfortable if he fulfilled his promises. Luina thought for a moment and then seemed to have come up with an idea. Meanwhile, Dante was hiding and watching from afar, wondering what his uncle was talking about with that child in such a place. Suddenly, he heard her call his name, which aroused his shock and surprise. Luina suggested to the Duke with a friendly smile that Dante become a model with her. Dante was deeply shocked and wondered to himself what this girl was talking about. The events moved to Dante's perspective as he was on his way back in the carriage, remembering that a full year had already passed since his last visit to the Duke of Somerset's residence. This was the first time he had come to the palace without his parents, and although nothing had changed in the place, his feeling was completely different, and the reason for that was the presence of that child, Luina. He wondered to himself how he could become a model at her request. He denounced in anger how she could think he would agree to such a request. In his opinion, this girl didn't stop at gaining the favor of his grandmother, known for being hard to please. But now his uncle intended to officially register her in the family. It seemed to him as if she had been a member of the family for a long time. Even all the servants in the palace were kind to her. Fear took hold of him, and he wondered if she would truly replace him, and if he would be abandoned again completely, just as his nanny had told him. Memories returned to a year ago, where he was running after his nanny as she was leaving, pleading with her not to go. He asked her tearfully why she was resigning, asserting that if she left him too, he would remain alone. But she confronted him with a cold question as to whether he knew why she hadn't left immediately after his parents' death. When he answered that, he thought she was worried about him. She mocked him, saying the reason wasn't that trivial. She revealed to him a harsh truth, that she only stayed to extort more money from his uncle, the new Duke of Somerset, which struck Dante with a shock that paralyzed his movement. She told him it was time for him to know the truth, and that he should never forget he could be abandoned at any time. Then she left him alone in the large hall, assuring him that no one cared for a child who had no money or guardian. Since then, he was gripped by the fear that after his parents' departure, if his uncle lost interest in him, he would be left completely alone. For this reason, he decided he must carry out the task his uncle asked of him to the fullest to prove his worth. For his uncle had summoned him to his office and asked for help, to become the face of the White Rose alongside Luina. Although his uncle told him it might be a burden and he was free to refuse, Dante saw it as an opportunity, especially since his uncle also suggested he meet Luina. He considered it a chance to prove he was someone this family needed, and he agreed immediately. He pleaded with his uncle to allow him to do it, asserting he would prove to him he was worthy of the heir's position. Seymour smiled and thanked him, saying he was counting on him. Dante felt proud and answered enthusiastically. But now, after seeing how easily Luina gained everyone's favor, he began to wonder if he would be able to do the same. But he soon gathered his courage while in the carriage, deciding not to worry too much and that he must perform this task perfectly. After moments, a servant announced the arrival of the young master. At the location of the shoot, the artist Auber was extremely enthusiastic, praising Luina, who was standing before him carrying a bouquet of flowers, asserting her performance was excellent. Luina smiled happily when she saw Dante's arrival, while Auber continued to praise her wonderful smile. Luina welcomed him warmly as she waved to him, while Dante approached accompanied by an assistant. Dante looked at her warm welcome and resolved in himself that, no matter the cost, his performance must be better than hers, and that he must surely earn his uncle's satisfaction. The assistant told him he could change his clothes in the next room while Luina invited him to join them quickly. But Dante ignored her and went on his way, which made Luina's smile fade for a moment, and she wondered in confusion if he still hated her. However, she soon regained her optimism, considering this situation still represented an opportunity for them to get close to each other and that time was still on their side. After Dante changed his clothes, the duo began to stand together. Auber asked them to stand near each other friendly under one umbrella. He directed them to take closer poses, such as touching their cheeks and holding each other's hands, expressing his deep admiration for how cute they were together. Auber was at the peak of his happiness, announcing this was exactly what he was looking for, and that the sketch was flowing from him perfectly. After a period of work, they announced a short break, so Luina turned toward Dante to ask him if he was tired, but she was surprised that he had disappeared from her side. The assistant told her that the young master Dante had gone to the lobby first, so Luina thanked him kindly. Auber approached her and showed her one of the sketches, pointing out that it was drawn very nicely and uniquely, which made her ask him curiously if this was true. When she looked at the drawing, she noticed Dante looked good too, so she asked Auber's permission to take the drawing to show Dante, and he agreed immediately. Luina decided to use this drawing to start a conversation with him and try to get close to him, especially since he was avoiding looking at her earlier, which prevented any real dialogue between them. She believed that if they talked while looking at the drawing, things between them might improve a little. While on her way, she accidentally collided with another girl, which made her stumble and apologize immediately. The other girl exploded in her face angrily, wondering about her problem and attacking her for being small in size and not looking in front of her. Luina tried to apologize again, explaining she was absent-minded, but the girl interrupted her rudely, wondering if she even knew who she was and insisting she should have paid attention to her path. Luina thought to herself she was unlucky to meet this type of child, who was common in the orphanage, who tries to impose control by raising their voice, so the girl demanded she apologize properly. When the girl continued screaming, Luina smiled a broad smile, realizing that dealing with such children was easy for her. She surprised the girl by saying cheerfully that she looked like a dog's paw. The girl was struck with shock and confusion and asked her angrily what she was saying. Luina knew the best way to deal with someone who gets angry for no reason is to smile and return the insult calmly, so she repeated again that the girl looked like a dog's paw. The girl was fuming with anger and trembled as she repeated Luina's words, then raised her hand to slap her. Luina realized she was about to be hit, so she closed her eyes tightly. But before the girl's hand reached her face, another hand grabbed it, and a firm voice asked the girl what she thought she was doing. When Luina opened her eyes, she was surprised to see it was Dante who stopped the girl. Dante confronted the girl firmly, asking her if she truly planned to lay a hand on her. The girl responded rudely and mockingly, wondering about his identity and asserting that even if she were to do it, what would he do about it? Claiming that Luina was the one who started the fight first. She shouted in his face, saying it was none of his business, and that he should be silent and mind his own business, which made Luina think to herself that she truly possessed a bad temper. But Dante didn't back down and told her that regardless of who started it, Luina was here as a model. He asked her if she was ready to bear full responsibility if any mistake occurred during the photo shoot, and added that he works alongside her as a model, and it was natural for him to feel concerned about her. Luina felt surprised and happy because Dante was defending her. After she thought he hated her, hope began to haunt her that perhaps he didn't hate her that much. The girl screamed angrily, wondering about her problem and how long she had known the time she spent as a model here. Then she began to call for her father loudly, announcing she wasn't here alone. Luina mocked her behavior, considering her summoning of an adult a pathetic thing. At that moment, her father appeared, asking anxiously what was happening to his little princess. The girl ran into her father's arms, complaining that they were bullying her, which aroused the anger of her father, who wondered about the identity of who dared to do that. He asked them rudely about the family they belonged to act with such arrogance and demanded they bring their parents immediately. So Luina answered him innocently that they didn't have parents. The man was struck with confusion and began to think that their clothes were from brands he had never seen before and didn't look high-end. He concluded that at best they were just two orphans cared for by a small family. Then he continued his insulting talk, saying this is the reason why children who grow up without parents are hopeless, and that they clearly lack proper upbringing, and warned them that if they continued to act this way. Suddenly, he heard a voice that interrupted him with a cold and firm tone, completing his speech that they would pay the price for their reckless tongues, just as he was about to do. When they turned, they found the Duke of Somerset, Seymour, standing before them. Seymour told him sharply that if he heard correctly, he had just insulted his niece and a child he personally cares for. The man was struck with panic and tried to justify that he was only trying to discipline the girl and wondered in shock if she was truly the Duke's niece. Seymour confirmed that this makes the matter more dangerous and revealed to him that this girl is a child he brought to be his heir and asked him how he dared to insult the Somerset name. The man hastened to bow and apologize, admitting he acted with ignorance and committed a grave mistake. At that moment, the artist Ober arrived, wondering about the reason for all this fuss, so Seymour told him his timing was perfect because he was about to return. He explained to him that Luina and Dante had been insulted by these people, which shocked Ober. Then Seymour placed his hand on Dante's shoulder and told Ober he didn't wish to stay in the same place with them anymore, and that if he wished to finish Luina's drawing, he had to solve this mess himself, then left. Later, the maid Erie was serving cake to Luina and telling her she heard she went through a scary situation and offered her more if she wanted. Luina was enjoying the cake happily, thinking to herself that if she would get cake every time something like this happened, she was always ready for it. In another place, Seymour was talking with Dante and told him he heard how he defended her when Luina was insulted. Then he patted his head gently, praising his good deed and expressing his happiness for his presence there. Dante felt embarrassed and muttered that the matter wasn't much, and that he did what he had to do. Luina returned to eat the cake and noticed Dante's presence, so she thought he didn't look as happy as before. While the maid brought more cake for Luina, she noticed Dante wasn't eating. Luina wondered to herself if Dante hated cake, so she took the initiative to offer a piece to him, asserting it was very delicious. But he refused, coldly saying he wouldn't. Rather, he asked her to keep it for herself. Luina felt disappointed, noting that he had returned to his usual coldness again. When he stood up to leave, Luina asked him in surprise where he was going, and he replied sharply that it was none of her business. Luina was surprised by his behavior. It seemed to her he was in a good mood a few moments ago. Later, Dante was in his room trying to read, but he couldn't focus at all. Memories returned to the moment his uncle praised him, and he felt embarrassed of himself because he got so excited over a simple compliment. He scolded himself for his childish joy, reminding it that he only did what he had to do. The memory of his nanny's departure was still vivid in his mind, which solidified his conviction that he couldn't act as a child. For this reason, he decided not to get carried away by his feelings and to continue acting calmly and obediently as he always did. His thoughts were interrupted by Luina, who entered the room suddenly calling him. So he asked her in surprise what she was doing here, and she told him she knew she would find him in this place. She explained to him that she brought him cake because he couldn't eat his dinner because of what happened earlier. Although she remembered his previous refusal, she thought he might be hungry, which made him wonder in surprise if she had come all this way for this only. But he repeated his refusal again. So Luina insisted that he must try it because it's truly delicious. She tried to convince him to take one bite, but he exploded in anger and pushed the plate away, screaming that he said no. Then he confronted her angrily, considering these things are meant for children and that he cannot be treated as a child if he is to become the heir. He added bitterly that it must be nice for her. He continued screaming that she can act spoiled and stir up tantrums because everyone loves her, but he is completely different from her, for he can be kicked out at any moment. Luina asked him calmly about the reason for his belief that the Duke would abandon him, which surprised him. Then she wiped his tears gently, assuring him the Duke would never abandon him. Dante wondered how she could know that, so she answered him with a confident smile that she is the proof of that. Confusion struck him, so she explained to him that she joined the Somerset family specifically to marry him and to make him the next Duke of Somerset, which shocked Dante, who wondered in bewilderment if Luina was his intended fiancée. Dante asked her if she had come here only to secure his position as heir, so she confirmed that to him and told him also that his uncle is aware of the matter and approves of it. He continued his questions, wondering why she was giving him the position while she could have taken it for herself. Luina thought that her true goal wasn't the title, but the cure for the Lily disease, but she couldn't tell him that. Instead, she answered him simply that she did it because she wanted a family, which left him speechless. Luina admitted she was always alone and that she only longed for someone to need her. With a sincere smile, she confirmed she doesn't care about titles or succession, and that all she needs is a family that stands by her side. Dante realized that this child, Luina, is exactly like him. She too was afraid of being alone. Luina apologized to him for surprising him with this talk she hadn't planned to say, admitting it might seem sudden and hard to believe, but Dante surprised her by saying he believes her. He believed what she said about her need for a family. Luina couldn't contain her joy, so she grabbed his hands and thanked him for his trust in her. Then she approached him and told him that since they were to marry, there was a strict policy of no betrayal, ever. Dante asked her seriously if she was truly on his side, so she confirmed that to him enthusiastically. She added that he must be on her side too. She needs him with her from now on and forever. Dante hesitated for a moment and then asked her to promise him she would keep her word. She answered him with a broad smile, confirming her promise. Then she took his pinky finger and made a pinky promise with him and sealed it with a thumbprint seal. Later, they were sitting together in the kitchen eating snacks. Dante asked her if this was the reason for her sneaking into the kitchen, so she answered happily, confirming the food is delicious. Then he asked her to keep what happened today a secret between them, and she agreed immediately. When he noticed she was carrying a basket full of cakes, he asked her if she was planning to eat all that, so she told him this cake is meant for another person, and she's on her way to deliver it to the Duke. Indeed, she went to Seymour's office and presented him the cakes as a special delivery. Seymour looked at her tiredly, noting she was still awake, so she told him she saw him working late again and insisted he have at least a snack. She reminded him that his bedtime was approaching and that if he didn't finish his work soon, she would be late for reading him a bedtime story. Seymour told her he was about to finish and that she could enter and wait and eat the cake, which made her very happy. Then he returned to his meeting and asked his assistants to resume talking, wondering about the identity of the model Donna Devon. Luina realized they were talking about the dog's paw girl she saw earlier. Derek explained that Miss Donna Devon was scheduled to be the face of the new brand of the Mortier Company, and that they intended to keep the matter secret. But because of the incident that occurred with Luina, their secret was exposed. The Duke wondered about the name of the new brand, so Derek told him it's Eden, and that this is the real place of concern. Although the Mortier Company is a well-established player in the clothing industry, the concept of their new brand and their target audience, even the launch date, matches their brand perfectly. Derek expressed his concern that as a newcomer to the market, they don't have a chance to win and suggested postponing the launch date. But Seymour flatly rejected the idea, asserting the contracts had already been signed and they couldn't afford any delay at this stage. When Derek suggested changing the designs, Seymour rejected that too, explaining they lacked the budget to increase their marketing efforts, and that changing designs now meant throwing away their entire inventory. While Luina was listening, she realized this situation had turned into a real headache and wondered if they had just mentioned the name Eden, for this was the breaking point where Seymour faces the original hero of the novel. She remembered Seymour's words in the novel as he addressed Valentine Mortier, accusing him of interfering in his path at every turn and that nothing had been going right because of him since Eden appeared. Valentine Mortier was the head of the Mortier family, a long-standing rival to the Somerset family, and more importantly, he was the true male lead in the original novel, The Withering White Lilies. This matter was only mentioned briefly in the book, but their fateful relationship started here, with the Eden brand. Unlike Seymour, who started from scratch, Valentine's Eden brand was built on the foundation of his already existing fashion empire. And thanks to his commercial experience and unique designs, he managed to gain the favor of the emperor's consort, which caused a great stir among noble ladies and young women. Therefore, in a normal situation, Seymour's new project was doomed to fail. But Luina thought this time is different because she is here. As proof of that, she managed to secure a photo shoot with Mr. Auber, but she realized it was too early to relax. The photo is great, but it's not enough. She needs a certain way to prevent the collapse of Seymour's brand. She began urging herself to think, realizing she needs something more effective than photos. If she doesn't find a quick solution, Seymour's business will fail again. He will end up drowning in debt and living like a workaholic zombie forever. Worse yet, she will never get the cure she needs, something she cannot allow to happen. Her deep thinking was interrupted by the sound of shouting, where one of Auber's assistants was scolding a boy accusing him of touching his painting in the studio. The boy defended himself, saying he only wanted to take a look at it, but the assistant mocked him, accusing him of trying to steal. The boy denied that strongly. Luina was watching the situation from afar, wondering why they accused someone without any evidence, and that these adults were acting childishly. So she decided to intervene to help the boy who seemed in trouble. She headed toward the assistants and asked them if they were Mr. Auber's assistants, then told them that Mr. Auber is very angry now. They were struck with confusion and asked her about her identity, so she told them they should go see him quickly. The two assistants rushed off in panic, while Luina apologized in secret to Mr. Auber for involving him in the matter. After they left, she approached the boy and asked him if he was okay. He thanked her hesitantly. The boy recognized her as the model who was on stage, so she asked him if he worked here, and he replied he was just an ordinary worker. Luina noticed a drawing on the ground and asked him if it belonged to him. She leaned to pick it up, so he answered her that he drew it, but the matter isn't worth mentioning, trying to hide the drawing. But she managed to see it and asked him if he was a painter. He denied that embarrassed, but admitted he wished to become one day. Then Luina's face lit up with hope, and she told him she believed she could help him and that she found a way to defeat Valentine's brand. Confusion appeared on the boy's face. Luina showed him the drawing and asked him if he was the one who drew her. He answered in the affirmative, explaining he drew a quick sketch during the break. Luina was impressed by how good the drawing was, and the boy thanked her shyly. Then she looked at the drawing again and realized something important. Among all the clothes, he drew her wearing pajamas, something she hadn't thought of before because she wears them every day. These pajamas, or more accurately, the chemise dresses used as undergarments or nightgowns, were what would cause a great stir in the fashion world a few years later and become a trendy style under the name the pajama dress. People had already begun to tire of shimmering dresses and were looking for natural patterns, so there was nothing more suitable than this for the current trend. Since it was just a preview of an already guaranteed trend, Seymour wouldn't lose anything. Rather, he would gain the image of a natural fashion pioneer in the world of fashion. And she realized this is the perfect plan. In addition to this drawing skill, he drew her in a short break, which means his hands are fast too. Luina asked him about his name, and he answered her shyly that his name is David. Luina was struck with shock. She suddenly realized the reason for this amazing natural talent and that extraordinary beauty he possessed. She was certain it was him, the person who would burst onto the art scene like a comet a few years later, the handsome genius painter David Genea. She remembered he was famous for drawing in black and white only, which fits perfectly with her idea. Chemise dresses are mostly white anyway, so colors aren't necessary. Her thinking was interrupted by David, who asked her anxiously if she was okay, so she told him she was absent-minded for a moment. Luina thought that with this skill, it's a pity to work as a simple worker and not even a painter's assistant. Although she knew he would achieve fame in the end, she felt it was a pity to let this talent go to waste. So she decided to help him. She asked him if he had said he wanted to become a painter, and he answered in the affirmative. So she asked him enthusiastically if he would do it if someone asked him, but he answered in despair, wondering who would hire him. She answered him enthusiastically that she is the one who will hire him and that since she will give him support, it's better that she be the one who sponsors him. And she asked him with a bright smile to follow her. Later, in Seymour's office, Luina was presenting him her idea, suggesting the promotion of the chemise dress using black and white pamphlets. David agreed with her, feeling afraid of the possibility of the Duke's rejection. Derek didn't stop at describing the idea as not bad. Rather, he described it as completely perfect. He continued enthusiastically that this idea would grab attention and cause a stir, and although the pajama dress might seem very bold, what matters now is grabbing attention. For a new brand, the most important thing is establishing its name in people's minds, even by pushing them to enter the store once. He added enthusiastically that noble ladies who come to buy dresses won't hesitate to buy a nightgown too. Sales of chemise dresses are guaranteed. Derek carried Luina enthusiastically, describing her as a genius, and asked Duke Axel for his opinion. Axel replied that although the matter is risky, they are already in an all-out battle, and it's better to try something even if the chance of success is slim instead of doing nothing. Seymour approved the plan and ordered them to move forward. He tasked David with the mission of designs and focusing their efforts on the pamphlets. Then he ordered him to add the project to the list of projects sponsored by Somerset. So David agreed immediately. Seymour's White Rose brand achieved a crushing success from the beginning. Society ladies began to wonder about the new White Rose dresses, or what's known as the pajama dress. The pamphlets were the reason for the news spread, and although some considered the matter embarrassing and shameful, wondering how undergarments could be worn outside, the whispers of conservative nobles only increased the brand's promotion. The black and white drawing made the girl in the photo look more innocent and pure, and everyone hastened to comment on the idea of launching the chemise dress as a regular dress. Thanks to that, no other brand could compete with the stir White Rose created. As a result, the Mortier company felt threatened and began publishing negative articles about White Rose, accusing it of facing repeated claims related to quality. When Axel asked Seymour what to do, he ordered him calmly to move forward with an immediate quality check. By effectively addressing the accusations, they were able to prove that White Rose clothing was of the highest quality. Finally, when Countess Queensberry, a famous socialite who popularized tea parties and picnics in high society, began wearing the pajama dress at her private tea parties, the chemise dress officially became a popular trend and achieved overwhelming success. Since the launch of White Rose, Luina had lived nothing but happy days. Every servant in the palace longed to see and pamper her, welcoming the arrival of the brilliant young lady. Luina was in a stationery shop choosing colored pens with one of the maids. Meanwhile, two girls were watching her from afar, whispering that it was indeed her. Luina wondered at their whispering and questioned what was happening. The two girls approached her enthusiastically, announcing that she was the girl from the advertisement pamphlet and expressing how cute she was. The maid whispered to Luina that they had recognized her. From then on, she received praise everywhere she went, and even her relationship with Dante improved significantly. One day, while she was studying, she admitted to him that she didn't understand a certain problem, so he offered to teach it to her, and thus they began studying together. Luina felt overjoyed, believing that at this rate, nothing would be able to frustrate the Duke. Consequently, she would be able to obtain the treatment faster, and her escape from her inevitable fate was not far off. She headed to the Duke's office, expecting him to be in a good mood now, imagining he would thank her for everything. Perhaps he would even praise her as he does with Axel and Derek, and she would get the treatment immediately. When she arrived, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. She stole a glance inside, expecting to see him smiling happily, but she was surprised to find he had a guest. When she saw Seymour's face, she was shocked, for he looked worse than before. Confusion took hold of her as she wondered what had gone wrong. Instead of being happy, his facial expression was worse than the first time she saw him, and she felt that this couldn't be happening. She wondered in panic what on earth had happened during her absence. Suddenly, Seymour called her and asked her to come in instead of loitering outside, so she realized she had been discovered. When she entered, the guest asked if she was the little girl in question, and Axel replied that she was the face of White Rose. Luina introduced herself with a smile and asked the man who he was. He answered that his name was Jaden Dormer, and she felt the name was familiar. Axel told her that this gentleman was the vice president of their company, and here Luina suddenly remembered he was the person briefly mentioned in the novel, The Withering White Lilies. He was the fraudster who would run away with the funds of Seymour's company. Luina pondered the situation, wondering how the vice president was the fraudster who would flee with the company's money. It was the perfect position to take the money and run, and she concluded that this was the reason for the Duke's bad mood. At that moment, Jaden asked for permission to leave since the young lady had arrived, and asked the Duke to review the documents he had submitted to him. Luina wondered to herself about the nature of these documents, and concluded they must carry bad news since they were from a bad person. For this reason, the Duke seemed very upset, and she was, overcome with curiosity to know what was written in them. When she tried to steal a glance, she caught the name Quentin Graham, and wondered if this was the name of the Duke's late brother. Panic struck her as she wondered why his name was here, so she tried to move closer. But Seymour stopped her, telling her that these were not things for children to see, and that he didn't have time to play with her today. Then he asked her to return later when it was bedtime, and thus she found herself dismissed from the office. She stood outside the door thinking that there was something in those papers bothering the Duke, and wondered what it could be. But he had told her to return at bedtime, so she decided she had no choice but to use that method. She burst into Dante's room, startling him, and asked him enthusiastically if he was on her side, and he was surprised by her sudden question. He assured her that he was, of course, on her side, but wondered why she was asking, so she asked for his help. Later that night, Seymour sat in his office contemplating the documents, thinking about the amount of debt Quentin owed to Somerset. Quentin Graham was his older brother and Dante's father, and he had been a truly kind man. He remembered how Quentin was always worried about him, urging him to enjoy his time a little instead of always thinking about work. He was a gentle person who always met him with a smile, even when Seymour was blunt, and would support anything he did, though he worried he might overwork himself. But who knew such a secret lay behind that smile? After Quentin's death, the massive debt he had accumulated was revealed, as he had been managing several companies for a long time. But due to the sudden withdrawal of investors, his businesses failed one after another, and Seymour inherited all this debt along with the Graham title. Seymour thought that a debt of this size must have started a long time ago, and wondered why his brother hadn't said anything until things got this bad. He wondered how a family head could be so irresponsible, then felt sorry for thinking this way about a dead man. Although he believed he could handle the debt somehow, he wondered how he was supposed to explain this about his father to Dante. He sighed deeply, realizing that on days like these, he couldn't help but think of someone he missed. He recalled the memory of his late wife, Rose. His thoughts were interrupted by Luina's voice calling him, as she had come to him at bedtime. Seymour looked at her in surprise, and she told him with a bright smile while holding a book that bedtime had come. Seymour remembered his promise, and she told him she would love this fairy tale book. As Seymour left the room with Luina, he warned her against hiding cakes and eating them in secret, which made her realize he had discovered her, but she quickly replied that she hadn't hidden any cakes today. Luina laughed to herself, clarifying that she didn't mean cakes anyway. Then the Duke warned her to be careful while climbing the stairs. In his room, Dante was trying to copy the documents, wondering in confusion why he was doing this. Events went back to 4 hours prior when Dante was still confused by Luina's request. She had asked him if he wanted to help her steal his uncle's documents, and she answered him enthusiastically that this was exactly what she meant. She explained to him that it wasn't difficult. All he had to do was steal them, copy them, and then return them to their place. She thought to herself that even if they couldn't take the originals, as long as they copied them accurately, there would be no problem. And if they looked into the documents, they would discover the reason for the Duke's depression, and could even stop that bad man's plan. And she asked him if he would help her, but Dante flatly refused. He told her to do it herself if she wanted, and not to involve him in the matter. Luina felt shocked by his categorical refusal, as she thought they had become close enough for him to at least consider it. Meanwhile, Dante thought to himself if he had treated her too harshly, but he quickly dismissed the idea, asserting that a mistake remains a mistake. He tried to address her, telling her not to take it personally and that she wasn't supposed to recklessly interfere in adult affairs. But she surprised him by crying and pleading, throwing herself on the floor and screaming that she didn't care and that he had to do it for her. Dante panicked at her behavior and asked her to get up, but she refused, claiming he was good at writing quickly while she was bad at handwriting. She added that it was only a few pages and they wouldn't be caught, and begged him to help her. Although he told her that her attempts were futile, she continued using childish tricks, reminding him that he said he was on her side and now he was abandoning her, and that these documents piqued his curiosity as well. Finally, Dante surrendered and agreed to help her on the condition that she get up, which made her very happy. She told him she hadn't seen the details, but she saw a name written on the documents. It was the name Quentin Graham. Dante asked her if that was his father's name, and if she was sure she saw it, and she confirmed it. Dante thought in confusion, how could there be documents bearing his father's name when he heard he died suddenly in an accident and didn't even leave a will? Luina asked him if he didn't trust her, and he answered after hesitation that he would help her, which made her describe him as the best ever. Returning to the present, Dante had finished copying the papers and remembered how his uncle scolded him and read him a boring fairy tale. Then he met Luina under a cover and told her he had copied everything and that it wasn't as difficult as she expected. Luina began reading the copied papers aloud. When she didn't understand some words, Dante offered to read them to her, and she insisted he read them aloud. He explained to her that the documents were basically a record investigating the amount of inheritance going to family members belonging to other families. In short, the papers explained that Quentin had researched the inheritance law 2 weeks before his death in an accident, specifically regarding how much of the Somerset family inheritance would go to Seymour, and under what circumstances these rights could not be claimed. At that time, their father, the former Duke of Somerset, was suffering from illness, and Quentin was drowning in debt due to a series of business failures. Quentin's actions could be interpreted in 2 ways. Either to find out how much inheritance he would receive if the Duke died, or to search for a way to claim Seymour's inheritance for himself. Luina realized this was the reason for the Duke's deteriorating mood. She remembered that even in the original story, Seymour hated Quentin, to the point that he was repeatedly depicted as hating Dante simply because he was Quentin's son. But now, before the original story began, their relationship didn't seem this bad. She wondered what kind of problem arose between them before the story started, and concluded that Seymour's core problems likely remained unresolved until he met the heroine. At present, these documents seemed the most likely reason, and that Jaden had handed them to him on purpose to sow distrust within the family, isolate them, and bring down the company. Luina resolved that she wouldn't allow Jaden to succeed in his plans, and that she would protect the Duke and Dante no matter the cost. She asked Dante if these were all the documents, and he answered in the affirmative. Luina noticed that Dante's facial expression became dark, and she suddenly realized that what she did was tantamount to telling him that his father was planning something terrible. She felt regret, for had she known the content of the papers, she wouldn't have asked him for help in the first place, and wondered what she should do now. But Dante told her not to worry, and that if his father made a mistake, it wasn't something deserving of consolation, and that as his son, he had to bear this responsibility. Luina was moved by his words, but whispered that it was still painful. He replied that even if it was painful, if he became the heir, his father's mistakes would become his responsibility as well. Luina felt sorry for him. Although he was still a child, she wished he wouldn't pressure himself this way. She decided to tell him a secret, so she told him that the person who brought these documents was a truly bad man, meaning these documents might be fake. Although she admitted they might be real as well, she didn't want him to feel too much pain, which made her smile. Then he reminded her of the promise she made with him, that they would stay on the same side from now on. She answered in the affirmative, but wondered why he, brought it up suddenly, so he held her hand and promised her that. Luina thought that she hoped Dante wasn't in too much pain, for he was her first friend in this novel, and she truly wanted to help him, and resolved to uncover the truth for his sake as well. Later, Seymour was asking Jaden about what he was asked to investigate. The other clarified that his secretary was right, and that he was the accompanying secretary to Quentin. Since his words sounded suspicious, he conducted an investigation and presented the results to Seymour. When Seymour read the report, he was surprised by what he found. It was a promissory note from the House of Hayworth, bearing the signatures of Quentin and Rose. Seymour wondered in shock how Quentin borrowed money from Rose, and were they that close? He was sure there were no dealings between them. Jaden smiled a wicked smile as he saw his plan to deceive the Duke succeed. The debt certificate bore the signatures of Quentin and Rose, but Seymour was sure they never met in private. This meant this document was proof that Rose met his older brother Quentin without his knowledge. Worse yet, the debt wasn't in Rose's name, but in the name of the Hayworth family. In this way, the debt becomes a family debt rather than an individual debt, and wouldn't be easily discovered unless someone investigated it on purpose. The deeper Seymour dug, the clearer it became. Rose was deceiving him. He was so buried in work that he didn't realize it for a whole year, even though the matter should have been revealed long ago. Seymour felt the absurdity of the whole situation. He thought about how it came to him doubting a romantic relationship between his wife and his brother, both of whom had passed away long ago. Then he said that conclusions couldn't be drawn based on this level of evidence alone. So Seymour ordered Jaden to make sure his secretary kept his mouth shut and didn't speak recklessly. Jaden responded and left, promising him that if he discovered any new information, he would inform him. Before he left, he asked Seymour not to worry too much. Outside, his deputy met him and asked if he had finished talking with the president, and he answered in the affirmative. His deputy wished him a safe trip, but after he left, Jaden muttered to himself, commenting that Seymour was a fool. Jaden Dormer was originally an executive in a logistics company on the verge of bankruptcy. But after the Hayworth family acquired the company, he became lucky and rose through the ranks until he reached the position of vice president. Although some might see him as a successful man in life, the reality was different. Due to his desperate addiction to gambling, he was drowning in massive debts. One day, when creditors chased him to his house, he decided to hide in the company for a while. He was thinking that the matter wasn't bad, and that he only needed to hold out for a few days. Although he felt sorry for Seymour Somerset, he saw that he had no other choice if he wanted to stay alive, and that the company would be his in a few days. He came up with this plan only a few months ago and didn't expect things to go this easily, but now he was drowning in debts he wagered using company funds. At that moment, his new secretary told him that the new secretary had arrived, so he ordered him to enter. The new secretary introduced himself as Peter. So Peter asked Jaden if the president visited this salon often, and he replied that he did sometimes. Then Peter told him that someone he used to serve often held secret meetings here, and asked him about his previous work experience. He answered that he previously worked as an accompanying secretary to Duke Quentin of the Somerset Ducal House, which made Jaden realize that this new secretary who joined by chance knew Somerset's secret. He thought that the family affairs of the executive and his love life were perfect for character assassination, and that if Seymour damaged the company's image, he would be fired quickly, and that if he could overthrow Seymour, who had been mentally unstable since the accident, Jaden thought to himself that it would be natural for him as the vice president to replace him, and that his plan was very successful. He mocked Seymour, who was trembling because of a few documents. He believed that even if Seymour's condition improved slightly thanks to the success of White Rose, it was only a matter of time before family issues crushed him again and mockingly encouraged him to doubt his dead family more. Rumors spread in the palace that the president was secretly meeting a married woman in Baileyport, and that more than one person had seen him there. Some wondered at the matter, for the president didn't seem like this type of person, but others added that the meeting place was the salon used by the wealthy for their secret meetings. Then they revealed that the woman intended was Mrs. Winslet, the famous and beautiful actress who married a prominent businessman 3 years ago. The chatter continued enthusiastically, as some denounced how he could see another woman only 1 year after the death of his wife, to whom he was deeply devoted, and how he chose an actress instead of a noble lady. Jaden interrupted them with a sharp question about what they were talking about, thinking to himself that Seymour's reputation among executives would collapse in a short time at this rate. The speakers panicked at the presence of the vice president, so Jaden exploited the situation, commenting that the president had a keen eye, but he should be more careful, and that if he leaked a little information at this stage, it would be enough to confirm the rumors. Jaden rejoiced at the rumors spreading so quickly, realizing that nothing spreads more easily and enthusiastically than the private life of the manager at work, and that he could just leave them to keep talking. Then he ordered them to return to work, but he suddenly heard a child's voice. It was Luina who appeared suddenly and asked the ladies if they knew Mrs. Winslet too. Jaden wondered in confusion from where this child appeared. Luina told them that Mrs. Winslet was her teacher and that she was happy she came, otherwise a catastrophe would have occurred. She added that she insisted on taking a tour of the company and denounced the spread of such bad rumors about the Duke. Luina thought that Jaden had truly fallen into the trap today and that things wouldn't go as he wished as long as she was around. The employees wondered about the identity of this child, so one of them remembered she was Luina Whitfield, the White Rose model. Then another added she was the one the Duke recently adopted to raise as his heir, so Luina confirmed that happily. One of the ladies asked her if Mrs. Winslet was truly her teacher, so she answered enthusiastically that the Duke brought her personally to be her teacher, and she was a wonderful and very beautiful person. When asked if the Duke was the one who brought her personally, she denied it, explaining that someone else recommended her, and that Mrs. Winslet thought a lot about the matter after receiving the Duke's letter before deciding to become her teacher. She continued her talk enthusiastically, explaining that the last time she wanted to see the downtown area, the Duke recommended a quiet place because Mrs. Winslet would get tired from the many people who would recognize her, and that unfortunately the Duke was too busy with work, so she went with his nephew Dante instead. The ladies wondered that what they heard was completely different and wondered how these rumors started. They agreed it was inconceivable he would hold a secret meeting while taking a child with him. Jaden approached Luina and asked her sharply what she was doing, pointing out that everything beyond that was an internal matter of the Somerset family. He added that he believed anything more than that would put the Duke in a difficult position, and that regardless of whether she was a model for the company brand, she couldn't enter the company recklessly. Jaden thought to himself that if he wasn't careful, his plan would collapse, and that he couldn't allow her to ruin his work after things had gone well. So he asked her to leave. Then he addressed everyone, asking them to return inside because the office had become too noisy. Luina looked at him, realizing he was trying to intentionally tarnish the Duke's reputation, and that although she corrected the facts, he was still trying to expel her, and decided she wouldn't leave quietly. She surprised him, saying she had a message she wanted to deliver to him. He asked her in surprise if the message was for him, and she answered him in the affirmative and told him that some people outside were looking for him. She followed up, explaining they were very angry and shouting his name, accusing him of being a rascal who wouldn't even pay the interest, and that they looked very scary, which struck Jaden with shock. He tried to deny the matter, but Luina interrupted him, asserting she heard them mentioning his name clearly. The ladies began to wonder in surprise about the debt collectors and how they could come to the company. Their view of the vice president changed, and they began whispering that they didn't expect him to be this type of person. Jaden realized that things didn't go as he planned. Luina exploited the situation and urged him to hurry to see them, pointing out they were still outside, while he was trembling with anger. At this moment, when he was shaken by her words, his words lost their power. Luina thought to herself, who would believe someone who couldn't even refute the words of a little girl? Confusion appeared on Jaden's face as he left hurriedly. The ladies began wondering if his words were just empty rumors, and concluded that a child wouldn't lie, and began questioning his talk. Since her mission had ended, Luina decided to go see the Duke. She set off happily to look for him, and wondered where he could be. Then she saw him walking with his assistant, so she called him and ran toward him, so he asked her the reason for her coming to the company. She told him she came to thank him for choosing her teacher personally. She bowed to him in thanks, which impressed his assistant, Axel. Seymour commented that she could have done that in the palace after work, and he patted her head gently, commenting that she went to the trouble of coming here. She told him this wasn't the only reason for her coming. She noticed his skin looked worse than before, so Seymour ordered his assistant Axel to prepare some refreshments in an empty room. Luina wondered to herself if Jaden had already done something, so Seymour invited her to go with him and promised to prepare some cakes for her. Luina rejoiced at the offer and decided to eat first and think later. While she was enjoying the cake, Seymour asked her if it was delicious. She answered him enthusiastically while her mouth was full that it was very delicious. She thought that this was an energy-boosting cake, and that at times like these, she must stay beside the Duke more. Luina surprised him by asking him not to worry at all. She assured him confidently that as long as she was around, there wouldn't be any problem no matter what happened in the future. Confusion appeared on Seymour's face from this sudden announcement, while Luina continued her promise that she would certainly protect him. Then she revealed the reason that seemed logical to her, which was that he wouldn't be able to bring her treatment unless he himself was safe, which made his assistant Axel whisper to the Duke that she seemed to mean she would eat everything, and Seymour agreed with him in silence. Later, during a drawing lesson with her teacher, Mrs. Winslet, she was asked to draw whatever she liked freely based on what she learned in the previous lesson. While she was drawing, her memory recalled Jaden's scary look at her the previous day, and she felt a little fear thinking that the other rumors she heard in the company must be related to him too. She wondered in concern about the number of malicious rumors he spread, and although she managed to stop them this time, she didn't know what might happen if things were left as they were. She realized that if things continued according to Jaden's wishes, the company would collapse again, and the family wealth would be completely degraded because of Quentin's debts. Worse yet, the relationship between Seymour and Dante would worsen as happened in the original story, which would push Seymour to the edge to collapse again. Just thinking about this future was horrific for her, so she resolved that she must stop Jaden from spreading more rumors. By that time, she had finished her drawing and felt satisfied. Luina proudly displayed her drawing to her teacher, who praised the accuracy of her work. The drawing depicted her and Dante with the Duke, and she decided she wanted to show it to the Duke herself, considering this the only way to personally monitor and protect him. Meanwhile, Jaden was striking his fist on the desk in a raging anger, wondering about the truth of this girl who ruined his plans. Thanks to her, a rumor spread that he was being chased by debt collectors. He vowed he would bring her down with Seymour because she dared to interfere in his plan. Since that girl started coming to the office, nothing had gone in his favor. After all the trouble he went through to spread rumors about Seymour, she was drawing all the attention to herself. She had become beloved among the employees as she constantly brought them cakes, and they affectionately asked her to give some to the president. Because of her vitality, Seymour's reputation began to improve among his employees who concluded he must be kind to her. Thus, while Seymour's reputation was improving, Jaden was being beaten by debt collectors in front of the company building. He remembered how he was insulted and beaten, and how they warned him that this was the last time, and that he had to bring the full amount next time, or else. Jaden realized he couldn't postpone the matter further and that he had to secure the funds by next week no matter the cost. If his original plan had gone smoothly, he would have embezzled the money amidst the chaos. But everything had become chaotic because of that girl who was acting in the office as if it were her backyard and constantly hindering his plans. Now that rumors of his debts had spread, he would be the first person suspected if company funds disappeared. So he needed a clever plan to embezzle the cash without raising suspicions about himself. And here he realized it wasn't necessary for him to be the one who took the money. He smiled cunningly. He had finally found the solution, which was to frame Seymour. He already possessed forged account books he prepared in advance as an escape plan after a major embezzlement operation, and there was no better bait than this to divert everyone's eyes. Although his situation was precarious due to creditors' rumors, everyone also knew that Seymour was in a fix because of his brother Quentin's debts, making him a perfect target for the charge. Jaden decided that as long as he was going to lose anyway, it was better for him to take a risk, and his plan was to leak the forged and suspicious account books to the company now. In his opinion, the executives, who are usually oblivious to employee gossip, would suspect Seymour long before they suspected him. And in this way, if things went as he planned, he would be able to overthrow Seymour without getting his hands dirty. As he was about to leave, he called his secretary Peter and told him he was heading to the bank. Then he tasked him with a secret mission, which was to burn the blue book on his desk, emphasizing to him not to leave any trace because it's a secret document. And Peter responded to the order, but hesitated while asking about the previous task he charged him with. But Jaden exploded in his face angrily, scolding him for his stupidity and demanding he finish the first task first, then deal with this one, and ordered him to just take care of the matter. So Peter responded immediately. After Jaden left in a fit of rage, Peter thought to himself that his master wouldn't return for a while, so he decided to finish organizing his files first, then dispose of the book in the evening. While he was walking, Luina suddenly collided with him, so her forehead hurt, and she apologized immediately, explaining she had gotten lost. Peter asked her kindly about the reason for her presence here, reassuring her and checking her forehead, and told her the Duke was on a business trip at the moment. Luina told him enthusiastically she wanted to show him her drawing, so Peter suggested she leave it in his office as a surprise, which made Luina very happy. Peter guided her to the Duke's office, which is located at the end of the corridor. After she thanked him and set off quickly, he wished her a safe arrival. But he stopped to think about the notebook she was carrying. It seemed strangely familiar to him. However, he quickly dismissed the idea, considering its color was common anyway. Meanwhile, Seymour had returned to the company. He found Luina in the employee's office drawing, so he welcomed her happily upon seeing her. Seymour asked her what she was doing in the employee's office, and she answered that she was drawing quietly so as not to disturb anyone. And of course, she was making sure no bad rumors were spread about him. Then she asked him enthusiastically if he had seen her wonderful drawing, asserting she left it on his desk. But Seymour's confusion as he asked what she was talking about made her realize he hadn't seen it. She explained to him that she placed the sketchbook next to a notebook, exactly like it. Here, his assistant Axel intervened, explaining it seemed she had entered the wrong room. He added that the CEO, Seymour, always keeps his door closed, and that she must have accidentally entered the vice president's office next door, which struck Luina with shock and horror. Panic took hold of her as she realized she left her notebook in the office of that man she hated, especially since she wrote many bad things about him in it. So she announced she would go get it immediately, and Seymour allowed her to go, warning her not to stumble. Luina ran to the office and stole a glance to find it empty, so she felt relieved. She entered quickly, determined to take her notebook and leave immediately. Indeed, she found it on the desk and felt relieved because he hadn't seen it yet. While she was leaving, Axel called her to tell her they were about to return to the palace if she didn't hurry, so she set off quickly to catch up with them. In her haste, she shouted at them not to leave her and rushed to catch up with the Duke, but she left behind on the desk a blue-colored notebook. After moments, Peter entered the empty office to find the notebook and wonder in confusion if this was the document that was supposed to be destroyed. Peter grabbed the blue book, and a strange feeling came over him that he had seen it somewhere before, but he soon dismissed the matter, considering it none of his business. That night at Somerset Palace, Seymour was walking with Luina and his assistant, and he asked her if she had brought the drawing she wanted to show him, and she answered enthusiastically that she had just brought it and would show it to him immediately. She added proudly that her teacher, Miss Winslet, had praised it a lot, and that originally she intended to make it a surprise for him. Then she presented him the open book with a broad smile and asked him for his opinion. But what was inside wasn't a drawing, but pages full of numbers resembling an account book. Astonishment rose on the faces of Seymour and his assistant as they looked at the unexpected contents of the book. Luina's smile faded and was replaced by extreme confusion. She believed she would present a portrait she drew, but she was shocked by what she saw. She realized in horror that this wasn't her school assignment notebook at all. Seymour asked her calmly from where she got it, and she answered him shyly that she took it from the vice president's office, explaining there was another notebook that exactly resembled her sketchbook, and that she must have mixed them up and left her notebook there instead of it. A look of realization and determination appeared on Seymour's face, so he called his assistant Axel and told him that the time had come to move forward with that matter. After some time had passed, an account book was revealed showing that Seymour had embezzled investment funds. This matter caused a great stir in the board meeting, as one of the directors wondered how that happened, while another expressed his dissatisfaction, considering this was what he feared from a nobleman's acquisition of the company. One of the directors' anger increased as he wondered if nobles even saw them as humans, and demanded the election of a new qualified person for this opportunity. Jaden was watching everything with a smug smile, considering it shameful that Seymour froze in his shock without presenting any refutation, and wondered to himself what he would do now. Then another director stood up and demanded Seymour answer, and asked him if it was true he embezzled the funds. Seymour maintained his calm and denied doing such a thing, but the director confronted him immediately with the blue account book, wondering about the meaning of this evidence. He explained that the notebook clearly shows the withdrawal of a large amount of money under the name of the Duke of Somerset, and asked him mockingly how they could believe him given such clear evidence, and if the record had appeared out of nowhere. Seymour looked at him with contempt, thinking about how rude it was to corner him with such weak evidence, then ordered him to be silent before he tore his mouth. The director was shocked, and silence prevailed in the tense room. Seymour looked at the attendees, thinking sarcastically that it's truly a wonderful world, where rascals like these can call themselves executives and walk with their heads held high. When one of them objected to the harshness of his talk, Seymour replied that what is truly harsh is their level of intelligence, and asked them if they seriously believed that someone like him, the head of the Somerset and Hayworth families, had any reason to embezzle company funds. He continued his scolding, expressing his regret that he trusted and entrusted work to such fools until now, wondering if they thought someone of his status would be so desperate for a few pennies to embezzle company funds. His strong words began to affect the attendees, so they began exchanging hesitant looks, and one of them admitted the evidence was indeed weak, especially since the notebook is the only proof. A woman agreed with him, adding that given how hard Seymour worked to save the company, it's inconceivable he would do something like this. Jaden felt tension as he saw the atmosphere began to turn against him, and realized he would be dragged into this chaos if the matter continued in this way, and that he must bring back the reins of matters to his side somehow. He struck his fist on the table and shouted in Seymour's face to stop this meaningless sophistry, wondering isn't there clear evidence already, and that if he couldn't explain the evidence correctly, his talk was meaningless. He added that if he didn't prove his claim, then his talk too was nothing but sophistry, which made Jaden smile maliciously and ask the others how they could trust and follow a fraudster who was only good at sweet talk. And he addressed everyone wondering if he was right, so the directors began muttering among themselves, agreeing the evidence had appeared anyway. Jaden smiled confidently, thinking that he had already disposed of the real account book, and wondered what Seymour could do more than that. But Seymour seemed unaffected, and said calmly that if this was the case, there was no escape from it, then ordered someone to enter. Luina entered the meeting room, sparking confusion among the directors who wondered about the identity of this child. But Jaden recognized her immediately, thinking angrily about why she was here. Before one of the directors clarified that she was Miss Luina, the White Rose model, Seymour confirmed her identity, then placed his hand on her shoulder and asked her to step forward and tell them what she knew. Luina began to narrate what happened, explaining that she had accidentally left her sketchbook in the vice president's room, and when she returned later to retrieve it, she made a mistake and brought another book that was in his room instead of her notebook. But she corrected her words, announcing that what she brought was not just a book, but the real account book, which shocked the attendees who wondered in amazement at the existence of two sets of accounts. Jaden was struck with panic, wondering how the real notebook could be here, as he was certain he had ordered his secretary Peter to dispose of it. He then wondered about the reality of the notebook he had presented as evidence. Seymour explained that after examining both notebooks, it turned out the records were identical up to a certain point. But this notebook, unlike Jaden's, did not contain any record of embezzled investment funds. He then asked Luina again where she had brought it from. Luina confirmed she brought it from the vice president's room, which made one of the directors notice the irony. Wasn't the vice president the one who raised this case in the first place? He continued, wondering how another account book could be found in his room, and demanded an immediate explanation from Jaden. The events flashed back to a few days ago, where Seymour revealed to Luina that she was right, and that the account book that should have been in the safe was indeed in the vice president's office. Axel told her she was correct in her suspicions, as he already had prior doubts that the vice president was embezzling company funds bit by bit, but he couldn't catch him due to a lack of conclusive evidence. He concluded that Jaden certainly had a plot since he was hiding the account book in secret. Seymour reassured the worried Luina that she was not wrong and patted her head, explaining it was lucky he saw the notebook first. Otherwise, she would have faced a big problem if she had been caught. Seymour was thinking that the recent rumors about Jaden were worrying, and that he must have been very desperate to hide something like this, predicting he would reveal his fangs very soon. Back to the present in the meeting room, Jaden exploded in a state of panic, shouting for them to be silent and denying knowledge of anything regarding this matter. He claimed all of this was just a conspiracy, and that Luina and Seymour were framing him, questioning if there was proof the notebook came from his room, and asserting there was no reason for him to do such a thing. But Seymour maintained his calm, considering it strange to deny the matter in the presence of clear evidence, and told his assistant Axel that he didn't want to use this step, but he no longer had another choice, and ordered him to bring in those people. As Axel opened the door, terror took hold of Jaden as he realized the identity of the newcomers. They were the debt collectors, the same people who were waiting in front of the company entrance. Jaden wondered in panic how they arrived here, so one of the directors explained that the atmosphere in the company had been turbulent recently due to strangers, and it turned out the whole matter was related to the funds Jaden embezzled. One of the debt collectors began to reveal the truth, explaining they came to collect a debt long overdue for several months, and that Jaden promised them he would be able to pay it after today passed. The other added that Jaden assured them he would be able to use company checks starting today, and even wrote them a note to that effect. Then he displayed the note that clearly bore the name Jaden Dormer and his signature. Seymour commented calmly, explaining that to use company checks, the required signature is not his personal one, but the signature of the official representative position. Thus, Jaden was cornered from every side as Seymour confronted him with circumstances, witnesses, and evidence. The forged account book aimed at framing him, in addition to the note, all because of gambling debts he couldn't handle financially. Seymour announced it was clear Jaden intended to overthrow him and seize the position of official representative, then asked him if he had anything else to say. Jaden could only stammer in refusal, realizing any further excuses seemed meaningless, and that the meeting was over for him. Seymour handed the papers to his assistant Axel, charging him with handling the rest of the matter. While they were leaving, Luina wondered if things had truly been resolved, and he told her the matter was over, and they could go. Luina smiled happily, realizing the problem was finally solved. Seymour apologized to Luina for involving her in adult matters, but she replied she was just happy she was able to help him, while Jaden thought of her name in anger. Jaden thought to himself angrily as he faced his fate, vowing he wouldn't let them get away with what they did. According to the report of his assistant Axel, The police searched Jaden's house after the meeting, where they discovered evidence of other embezzlements, and he was arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud. Fortunately, the investment funds embezzled from the Duke were recovered, and Luina believed this incident had ended peacefully for now. In his office, Axel expressed his relief to the Duke for resolving the matter without major problems, attributing the credit for avoiding the crisis to Miss Luina. Although Seymour agreed it was lucky, Axel noticed his master's appearance was still not good and asked him if there was something else still bothering him. Luina, meanwhile, was wondering anxiously why no sign of improvement appeared in Seymour's condition. While she was lost in her thoughts, wondering why the Duke was still worried, despite Jaden's arrest and the recovery of funds, Dante suddenly appeared behind her. Dante asked her what she was doing, accusing her of eavesdropping secretly outside his uncle's room, which confused her. Luina tried to silence him, and Dante explained to her that one shouldn't eavesdrop on adults' conversations, but she admitted this moment was very important, which sparked her worry about them being caught. Dante wondered to himself why she said that. Inside the room, Axel was explaining to Seymour that the reason for his worry was the information Jaden brought about Quentin, which didn't seem false. He then wondered if it was true that Lord Quentin and Lady Rose had a relationship of some kind. Luina was shocked hearing this talk, wondering about the nature of the relationship between Quentin and Rose. A horrific image of a romantic affair between them quickly jumped to her mind, like those that happen in adult stories, which terrified her deeply. Dante scolded her for eavesdropping on adults' conversations. Luina tried to explain to him, but he told her, sadly, that he understood now. He seemed in deep pain as he said there is always a reason why adults try to hide things. So Luina asked him anxiously if he was okay, but he asked her not to be hurt further and to return to her room, and Luina felt worried seeing how much he was hurting. She was gripped by worry that if the distance between Dante and the Duke continued to widen, everything would return to square one. Luina threw herself on her bed in her room, feeling she had caused a big mess unintentionally. She scolded herself with harsh words, realizing this was not the right time to involve Dante in the matter. His face looked deeply pained, and she realized he must be extremely upset, as the relationship between his late father and his aunt was now in question. She concluded that solving Seymour's problem alone was no longer enough, and that she had to find something to help both of them. Luina remembered the original novel didn't mention much about Rose and Quentin. They were just secondary characters in Seymour's past. Suddenly, an idea flashed in her mind, and she realized there was one way: going to Rose's room. In most families, the room of a deceased noble is emptied or reused, but the Duke of Somerset's house was an exceptional case. No action had been taken regarding that room at all. She remembered she once saw the servant Hugo coming out of Rose's room, and when she asked him about it, he told her it was because Seymour hadn't mentioned anything regarding the room. Hugo added that they don't dare raise the lady's story before the Duke, because he is not yet ready to hear anything about her. And they hope the day will come when the Duke himself, after having prepared himself mentally, asks to close this door. Luina realized this was the reason her glimpse of Rose's room seemed strange at the time. The door was always open, as if its owner had just stepped out, and the furniture was neatly arranged and free of a single speck of dust. But some belongings looked as if someone had been using them moments ago and left them in a state of mess, suggesting that Duchess Rose still lives and breathes in this house. Luina decided to take a quick look inside and leave, reasoning to herself that the door is always open anyway. She thought that even if she said she entered by mistake, she likely wouldn't be scolded harshly. In fact, she might get lucky and find something important. She was fascinated by the beauty of the room upon entering, but she soon began searching everywhere, under the bed and on the dressing table. But she found nothing at all. The only thing she managed to find was a drawer with a rose-shaped lock. But she couldn't find the key anywhere in the room, and although her intuition screamed at her to open that drawer, she couldn't look inside. Later, while sitting with Lady Hayworth, the lady noticed she looked very depressed and asked her if something had happened. Luina, whose mind was completely preoccupied with the lock, was flustered and hurried to deny it. The lady explained she had summoned her for the first time in a while to praise her after hearing about her from Mrs. Winslet, but she was sighing like an old person the whole time. When she noticed she didn't seem to have an appetite, she suggested removing all the snacks, which made Luina refuse immediately, asserting she was fine. Lady Hayworth smiled and told her she heard she was a great help to Seymour. Luina replied that it was nothing special, so the lady explained to her wisely that a single gold coin carries a different value for every person who possesses it, and praised what she did. She continued her talk while pruning a yellow rose, explaining that people also carry different values for different people, and that it is important to cut what must be cut and accept what must be accepted. She added that the same applies to remembering the past. The first time is always the hardest, but the ability to do so comes from realizing that there is no going back. Once one accepts the matter, it becomes easier afterward. Here, Luina asked her if the great lady had gone through that first time as well. She answered her in the affirmative, of course, then asked her in turn if she wasn't the one who gave it to her. Luina was surprised by the question, so the lady told her the matter was still hard for her to understand, but a day would come when she would. To end the difficult talk, the lady asked her to perform a task for her, to take a vase of roses and place it in Rose's room, and Luina agreed immediately, feeling relieved. This request pleased her very much, as it fell perfectly into her interest, since she was planning to visit Rose's room while at the Hayworth house anyway. She excused herself and entered the room Rose used before coming to Somerset, hoping to find some evidence in it. While she was searching for a place to put the vase, she caught sight of a golden key in an unexpected place. She hurried back to Lady Hayworth carrying the key and asked her if she recognized it. The lady told her this key was in Rose's room, but they couldn't find any lock matching it in the Hayworth property, so they left it alone, which amazed Luina. Luina asked her if she could borrow it for a while, and the lady allowed her to keep it, commenting that children tend to love such things. And Luina thanked her with overwhelming happiness. Hope took hold of her that this key might be able to open that drawer in Somerset Palace, and that the secret of Rose and Quentin might be inside. For this reason, she summoned Dante to the room, who wondered if this was the reason he was summoned, that they opened the drawer together using this key, and Luina confirmed that to him enthusiastically. But his silence and hesitation made her wonder anxiously if this matter was beyond his capacity. Hesitation took hold of Luina as she thought that opening the drawer might hurt Dante further for no reason, and decided it was better for her to do it alone later. She suggested they go out to play instead, considering the matter would be boring, but Dante surprised her with a categorical refusal. He explained to her that he wanted to check for himself and discover the truth of his father's personality. Luina asked him if he was sure, warning him that what was inside the drawer might contain bad things about his father, but he confirmed as he knelt beside her that he was ready and agreed. He added that even if what was inside revealed a side he didn't know about his father, he wanted to know the truth, which made Luina finally agree. After they opened the drawer using the key, they found something inside. It was a letter addressed to Lady Rose Hayworth from Quentin. Meanwhile, Seymour was in his office, drowned in his memories, wondering about the number of times his name had truly changed. The first change was by the will of his father, the former Duke of Somerset. His father, who had close ties with the Hayworth family, had made a deal with the former Marquis of Hayworth. The ducal Somerset family had 2 sons, while the Marquis of Hayworth had only 1 daughter. So the deal stipulated that his second son, Seymour, marry the Hayworth daughter as a son-in-law to the family. Since his older brother was going to inherit the title of Duke of Somerset anyway, his father intended to send him to the Hayworth family, so he could obtain a title instead of remaining with nothing. Perhaps this was a decision he made in his own way for the future of his second son, but for him as a child, it was different. He felt as if his father and family had abandoned him, and even after going to Hayworth, he continued to feel like a stranger, living a life where he belonged nowhere. But what finally allowed him to settle and take root was Rose, who asked him for marriage not because of a family agreement decided by adults, but because she truly wanted to be with him. She promised him she would become the place he could return to, and that she would stay by his side until the Hayworth house became a home for him. It was Rose who asked him to marry her. The memory of that day remained vivid in his mind. Her warmth, her hands that held him, and her cheerful voice as she smiled at him. Rose was the place he belonged to, and his reason for being in life. But now he was thinking painfully how Rose was hiding something behind his back, and with his brother specifically. He felt he should have followed her to the end without ever knowing about her alleged relationship with Quentin. Had he died after her, perhaps it wouldn't have hurt him this much. His dark thoughts were interrupted by Luina, who suddenly appeared wearing her nightgown to tell him that bedtime had already come. She expressed her surprise that he was still working. She urged him to hurry, put his things aside and get up, and he responded to her reluctantly. While she was leading him holding his hand, she scolded him saying if she weren't here, he would have stayed awake all night again, while he wondered to himself if she even realized what she was doing. A slight smile appeared on his face. He noticed she always appeared whenever he indulged in his dark thoughts. Although her constant visits were annoying at first, he had now become accustomed to this routine, which he found ridiculous. In his bedroom, Luina had prepared the bed and ordered him to lie down immediately. While he was lying down, he warned her not to fall asleep first while reading as she did last time, so she reassured him and promised him that today's story would truly please him. Seymour smiled while lying in his bed, thinking sarcastically that it was unlikely the story would please him, and that her way of worrying about him was strangely impressive. Luina asked him to close his eyes now. This childish bedtime story time had become the only time his thoughts finally calmed down. Although he found it strange, this boring and predictable fairy tale succeeded in calming him. Then Luina announced she would begin reading now. But what she read wasn't a fairy tale, but a letter addressed to Dear Lady Rose Hayworth, in which the writer clarified it was the first time he greeted her via letter, which made Seymour open his eyes in surprise. Louina continued reading, with the writer revealing in his letter his apology for leaving without a word at Field and Port last time, admitting he was drowning in debt. Seymour sat up straight, overcome with astonishment. Seymour asked Louina to show him that letter. She presented it to him with a smile. As he read the letter, it turned out the reason Quentin went to Field and Port was to borrow money from Marquis Talbot. Quentin explained in his letter that he felt ashamed and wanted to stand on his feet without relying on the family, so he didn't tell anyone. And although he knew Seymour would have helped him if he asked, as his older brother, he felt that admitting his failure was a humiliating thing. For this reason, he asked Rose to keep the matter secret from Seymour for the time being, and thanked her for the funds she provided him then, which allowed him to extinguish the immediate fire. He expressed his gratitude for her help, asserting he wouldn't forget this debt, then added in a side note that it seemed Seymour might face difficulty in obtaining the Somerset inheritance. He suggested they needed to discuss this matter, and asked if she could ask Seymour to visit either the Graham or Somerset property soon. He added that if that were difficult, it would suffice if she only visited him, and that if she did, he would do his best to ensure Seymour obtained his legitimate share of the inheritance. He wanted to settle the inheritance fairly with Seymour. He believed their father would have wanted that too, even though he admitted that talking about inheritance at this early time seemed a bit excessive. But he wanted Seymour to know he deserved it, and as an older brother who had done nothing for him, this was the least he could do. Quentin revealed in his letter his sadness when he saw Seymour acting as if he had no older brother. He had considered him a lonely child practically since he was young. He concluded his letter with a touching plea to Rose, admitting he couldn't do it himself, and begging her to stay by Seymour's side for a long time. The letter was signed in the name of Quentin Graham. Seymour leaned on his bed, overcome with emotion as he sobbed. Louina noticed he couldn't even cry properly, and that his reaction was exactly identical to Dante's reaction. This brought her back in her memory to Dante, and how she told him his father was a truly good man, which Dante agreed with. Dante seemed deeply moved as he embraced the letters, asserting his father was a truly good man. Seymour returned in the present to thank Louina in a voice full of emotion. Then Louina hugged him gently. While she was in his arms, Louina was thinking about the events of the original novel, and how because of this incident and misunderstanding, Seymour was supposed to turn into the hidden villain after being betrayed by the people he loved most. But she realized that because of her intervention, Jaden's plot was stopped early. Thus, the deep misunderstanding Seymour had regarding Rose and Quentin was resolved. She wondered to herself if this meant her plan to prevent the Duke from becoming the hidden villain had succeeded peacefully. After all, the Seymour she saw personally was unstable after losing Rose, but he wasn't a villainous person as described in the original novel. Now that Seymour had regained his senses, she wished he could just advance the date of importing the Lily disease treatment. She wondered if things had truly gone well. Meanwhile, in a dark cell, Jaden was behind bars, muttering the name Louina Whitfield in a tone full of hatred.